Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Hauraki Subcommittee meeting as of the day or the 15th. If you'd like to do the committee chair, please.
Whakataka te ho ke te uru. Whakataka te ho ke te tonga. Kia mā kena ke uta. Kia mā taratara ke tai. Kia he aki ana te atakura. Ke teo, ke hoka, ke hauhu, te hei mauri ora.
Thank you. Any apologies? We put a warning here in two turned up. Thank you. And a mover and a seconder.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, should we just listen to Nikki, the CEO, and if you might just, I'm not here, she will be. It's not an apology, I just.
Thank you.
I'll move it.
Awesome. Thank you. Can I have a move and a seconder for the confirmation of the agenda, please?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just mention it in the agenda.
Yeah, and we're going to move the agenda to bring the presentation of the Roger Harris Scholarship after the conference. The minutes of the confirmation of the minutes of the 7th of December. That's wrong.
Oh.
Great, thank you. Any disclosures of interest? Sorry, do we need to disclosure for we have a move and a second of that, please. All in favour? Aye. Or against? So we'll let Adam will start it anyway with the presentation for the Roger Harris Whale Valley Scholarship 2023 award. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might just stand up. So what we're going to do is I'll just introduce the award committee, and then I'll invite Karen, who's the recipient, to come forward, and we'll hand over to Robbie to make the presentation and take some photos. Just by background, this is it's an honour to stand up before you today. Just to explain the award, this is the annual event that we do. Obviously, it is based on Roger Harris, the senior engineer, chief engineer, I think, for the Waihau Valley scheme. And obviously, we're still in this legacy, and we see the value of the scheme today, and obviously with recent events. So I will just explain a little bit more about the award, and then we'll get into the formalities. The Roger Harris Waihau Valley Scheme Scholarship was established in 1995 to mark the substantial completion of the Waihau Valley Scheme, and in particular to acknowledge the contribution of the late Roger Harris to the successful implementation of that project. Scholarship is available to students undertaking study in the fields of engineering, resource management, with a particular reference to river and catchment management. Students whose families reside in the Waihau Valley Scheme rating classification area are eligible to apply for the grant. Our recipient today, Karen, and welcome Karen, and welcome Glenys and Ian. And I might just pause there because many of you will obviously know Ian. Ian's has had a long and very successful career working in river and catchment management back in the catchment board days, Ian, and also with Waikato Regional Council, Environment Waikato, and also Hauraki District Council. And I owe much of my early learnings to the field of river management to Ian. So It's an honour to be here today. So just acknowledging you, and Glenys, very much welcome here to support Karen today as well. Very welcome. Karen completed her secondary education at Te Aroha College and is now in her second year of working towards the Bachelor of Engineering with honours in Environmental Engineering. Her academic achievements include Te Ao Marama Scholarship, the Certificate in Science and Technology, Bachelor of Media Arts, Top Public Relations Student, Brand Campaign Winner, Kai Evolution, recipient of the Gordon Chesterman Scholarship, ESU Doris Henry Award for Best Writing Student, and formal acknowledgement, Head of Media Arts, for outstanding academic results. Congratulations, Karen. That's a very substantial credit list to you, so well done. In the past, Karen has volunteered her time to a variety of events, including as a student representative in the Big Brother, Big Sister mentoring program. She has fundraised for Arthritis New Zealand, Breast Cancer Society, World Vision, and for numerous school and kindergarten events, Gumboot Day, Red Cross, Kids Sport Program, Gymnastics, Netball, to name a few. And you've got time to spend on other things. This year, this council is pleased to announce that the recipient of the scholarship is Karen McLeod. So, well done, Karen. What I do? Put the people in the family.
Not very good.
So yeah, just like present you with the award of the Ronda Harris Scholarship. Congratulations and well done. It's actually quite fitting with the relationship your dad would have had with my uncles and my father over the years that you were winning this award, because my family's been highly involved in the flood protection and the drainage area for the last 70 odd years as well. So it's quite fitting that this stays within families. It's quite cool. So thanks very much and good luck.
Thank you very much.
Jack, you do when I started.
So yeah, good my uncle. Yeah. So that's quite cool. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very Yeah, I'll take this. Yep. Could I have a seconder, please, for the
Yeah.
second? All in favour? Against? Up to Jody. Yep. Up to
So,
Jody.
Mr. Chairman, issues and actions. There were no issues and actions noted from the last meeting, so we will take that report, I guess, as read. So there's, I don't think any need for discussions.
So you move that, no? Yeah. No, and second, please. Donald, you second that for us?
Yeah. What am I saying?
That the report be,
Yes, I'm happy.
yeah, thank you. All in favour?
All right.
Carry, or against? Carried. Work program. So you're going to present that, Em?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a standard work program report that we present to the committee. It follows a standard template just to give an update on our capital and our operational work programs, including some key project updates and also some financial information. And so I will introduce the staff that are here today to help with the report. We will take it largely as read, but I will allow or hand over to Jody, Kenny and Ruben just to present any highlights or obviously here to answer any questions that the committee may wish to answer. But just by way of introduction, I'd like to introduce Reuben Mills, who's our land drainage manager. And you met Reuben at the last meeting. Jodie Kosian, who's the zone manager for Hauraki, and Kenny Groudon, who you'll know is the team lead for operations, also based in the Paira office. So yeah, welcome, and thanks for being here today. Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, I'll hand over to Jodie. That will. Shall we talk about the picture?
Yeah, you need to explain what it's about.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So this is a photo taken at our Huntley, what was it called? Golf course, Huntley Golf Course pump station. And so it was the site, a trial site for, I guess, state-of-the-art innovation design around our new through McEwen's pump company, which is a New Zealand-based company, to look at how that we could redesign the pump, which to ensure that it's more, I guess, fish-friendly. And so based on a lot of obviously overseas examples as well, but you bringing in the New Zealand number 8 wire and also thinking around how we can ensure our pump stations are going to meet the new environmental expectations around passing fish. So this is a downstream fish passage. And so this was the shot of Michelle White, who's our senior environmental officer. The pump had only been installed, I think, the week before, and we got a fresh or a rainstorm through the system. And what she's holding there is I think the minimum size we look at passing through is 600 millimeters. I think that's slightly
1.2.
1.2.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a migratory eel. So when you get the rains in the late summer, early autumn, it triggers migration. And so these eels, something triggers in them, they head off out into the river and heading up to, I think, Tonga for their breeding. So this tuna that you see before you here actually passed through the pump, the new pump, without any damage. And so I don't know how many other.
There's another 1 metre went through last week.
Yep. So thanks, Noel. So the results to date have been very, very successful. The pump station is also the pump design also enables it to run revolutions. I'm not an engineer, so I'm happy to be corrected here. But the impellers, which is the sort of like the corkscrew system, so it's still a vertical pump. This is not an Archimedes screw. Lifts the water, and so it runs at a rate that allows the longer eels to go through. And I think the angles of the impeller are sort of designed around how the eels or the tuna bend as they go up. And so it acts as a bit of a siphon, I guess. It drops the eel down and then it goes into the outlet and it helps the outlet river. So yeah, it's when you think about a design, you put it on a table, you draw it up, and then you put it into physical practice. It's great to see that from way to go, it's actually been a very successful design so far. So it is only one pump at that station. There are 2 other pumps there for those traditional pumps there. So, but it's exciting that we could look at some other.
they're 2030s too, isn't
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's our most common pump size. Yeah.
And the McEwens were saying to us that once the trial is finished, obviously it's got to be proved, that they'll look at the bigger pumps that we use as well.
And the likelihood was that the eels would even pass through that one even easier. Yeah. The bigger the pump, the more likely no fish killed is higher. And I just, pardon? No, the design is quite unique. It's like a cent. It actually looks like an Archimedes, but it isn't. But it's in a vertical pump. So when you're looking at it, it's actually like the pity we don't have the other picture, but it's something we definitely bring back to the committee next time because Greg's got a small working scale and it's actually quite unique how it works. And when we were with the fish flow guys the other day, he actually brought up a very interesting video of how when you bring how like an Archimedes works and how you could understand how this works now, that sort of when the swish, as they said, as this fish is swimming through it, it's sort of just snaking its way through that it's never going to get hit. It's actually, the design is really unique in how it works. So you think it's just a pump and it's going to, but it's how it actually is able to accomplish what it does is something quite amazing. So you wouldn't have thought just changing the blades around and changing the design would actually allow fish to flow through it, but it does, yeah. So it's most probably something that's going to happen to, well, if we can afford it, will be happening through the Hauraki plains quite a bit over the next 20 years, I'd imagine. These pumps will be changed to these, so
Very promising.
yeah, cool. And you want to add?
So it's exciting because we've got a couple of large Archimedes screw pump projects on at the moment, requires quite a lot of civil construction to happen with it. Whereas the idea of these are for all intents and purposes exactly the same as those McEwen pumps. So it's just lift out and replace as opposed to having to do substantial physical works inside. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Probably the largest aquatic life I've seen go through a pump in any international report. So out of any pumps, technically, it's the most fish friendly in the world at the moment.
And that was unscathed, that one. So 1.3 litres.
I mean, the biggest on the Bedfords and the Archimedes that I've read is about 700 mil internationally. So that's a great result.
That's seriously big eel. And the way you can tell that they're migratory is that the eyes start to bulge. Their eyes become bulgy and maybe bulgy, ready to go to Tonga. So to have that pass through with a New Zealand design built in New Zealand, where we're not going to get trapped in the Suez or anywhere else, and delivery is a big win for New Zealand in general.
And just throw one comment in, as I said to Greg a couple of days ago, it's great that we're getting these eels out now, and with the 1 metre one going through a female eel apparently. I said to Greg, it's great that we can get them out, but what are we doing about once they've gone to Tonga and bred and they come back? How do we get them back in the streams? Because at the moment we can't. So that's a challenge to the future.
Yeah, and this project is focused on downstream fish passage, but we do work around. I think one of our pumps will put floodgate in as well, so there is that sort of day-to-day tidal movement as well. You can help, but yeah, that's certainly a challenge for us in terms of upstream fish passage.
But the cost of them is quite a bit better than the alternative.
The cost of the pump is probably still to be landed. I mean, this is a prototype that's been put in. So it's gone through a whole research and development with Callahan Innovation. It's a one-off, so they've had to build one-off castings, one-off manufacturing process. So in terms of cost comparison, I think that still needs to be worked through in terms of large scale production. But as I said, the alternatives at the moment involve quite substantial civil engineering, civil physical works on site. So this potentially avoids all of that.
Yeah, it's basically it bolts in the same bolt holes. All it is the pump, the internal side of the pump itself is different inside.
I presume the intellectual property sits with McEwen.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and also the interesting.
It's electricity usage and its efficiency. The pumps, yeah. And there's susceptibility to blockage. Have you got any information on that?
Not at the moment, so that'll come with time. We're using similar screens at the site. Past. I think the power then maybe it is a slower rotating pump. I'm not sure about the power usage in terms of how it works with the existing vehicles and transformers, etc.
It's only been about 3 or 4 weeks in place at the Golf Club. So it's very new.
Technically, it shows a lower than our current, and in terms of blockage in that, because that's more controlled by the smarts in the pump station that do it. So blockage goes in them. If it's got control on it, it actually stops the pump, it spins it backwards to push everything out and things like that. And even with weed blockages and things like that, it can actually slow the pump down to keep pumping while somebody gets there to deal with the weed and that. So you get a more efficient and more productive pump, because normally if it gets blocked up, it'll turn off, and predict the pump won't turn on for another 15 minutes. So that's 15 minutes of downtime in that hour, and they'll turn on and off, and you might even get half the time, where with the new control gear, you get 100% of the time, just the output fluctuates.
But through Mr. I'll send some photos around to committee members if you want to show what it looks like.
Yep. I'm sure most of these guys here have got McEwen's pump sitting at the back of their farms or somewhere around, so they'd definitely be interested.
Yeah, yeah, next one on the Cal Franklin's 30th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just hand over to Jody, as I mentioned, just to highlight a few things. But on page 13 is the high-level summary of the operational capital work program, and there's a number of attachments that we're going to might refer to as well in subsequent pages. So, Jody.
Go forward on the slide. Yeah, thanks, Adam and Robbie. So yeah, the team are chipping away. We've completed all of the key KPI inspections of our stock banks and the major ones of the assets for the asset conditions to date, and we're moving more into finishing up our capital works and into the maintenance kind of phase of the program. The details, more specific details of the program are in the table on page 19. So they're much the same as last time, just the progress notes have been updated against them. So I won't go into too much detail on that. The land license inspections occurred over December and January. And the general feedback I've got is that they're generally in good nick. There's not a lot of damage that's been noted from the floodwaters from the cyclones. And the defects that have been noticed, whether they're WRC's responsibility or landowners' responsibility, those will start getting followed up over the next months to get them sorted out. There's, I think it might be further along in this presentation, so we'll wait to go in, but there's some graphs and charts and numbers associated with the findings of that inspection in the agenda pack. We've also applied for back in November and have been awarded $940,000 from the local government flood resilience co-investment fund. It was a fund put out kind of in two waves that we applied for last year, and it to assist with our recovery work that we're facing from the storm events from last year. So the funding agreement is just being finalized and signed now so that both parties are happy with the details of it. But essentially, it's 75% central government funding of the listed areas that we've put forward, and it'll be 25% contribution from us, which is essentially money that we were going to need to spend anyway. So this should be a good relief for us, or allow us to do a little bit more or focus in on some more areas than what we were before. So they've retro expected that from October. So some of the work that was undertaken when they were considering that the application, that's also going to be covered, which is fantastic, because we're in a position where we kind of couldn't stop with some of the repair work. We just had to go on regardless. So that was so that's a really good outcome. So that's going to be going over the next 2 years, and with a main focus on kind of the eastern Waiho, Ohinamuri, and Thames area. But we're also trying to get written in some areas in the Piako that have only just become relevant or known to us in the last few months, where there's some blockages. So that's a really good win for us. And the modeling is still going on. We're getting closer and closer to both the Waiho and the Piako River models being ready for actual, what does this mean type thing. So I'm hoping by the time we meet again in October that there'll be something for this group to consider. And that's it for the operational work program for floods anyway. So we can push on that. That's just there if we need it to carry on. Then that can
Probably.
Jody,
Oh,
so
sure.
to explain that better, that that relief fund is going to do just catchments on the eastern side of the Waihau, from Hauraki to Thames. That's where it's mainly going to be used.
We've worded it so that we're going to use it for main channel blockages south of Ohinamuri, and we can use it for Ohinamuri and everything up. Yeah, but we're also looking at putting in a change to include some areas in the Piako as well, which they've so far seemed quite happy to include. It's just we need to get the minister's check on that.
That's probably those tree blockages we had phone calls and concerns about from landowners between that confluence and Moral Road.
Road.
Yes, that's all that area.
Moral Road.
I think you were involved in some of the
22 trees across the
That's
river,
right,
isn't
yeah,
it?
so let's clean that up.
So there's quite a high level summary of the financials there, and those are also included in your packs as well. We're sitting relatively where we expected to be for this time of the year. The flood is sitting overspent to what we had in the annual plan, but that's just a reflection of the flood recovery works that we've been undertaking, and the plan is to use the flood reserves to cover that as needed. There's also we've entered into a bit of a new financial system in the council, and so at the moment some of the costs aren't going into the right centers, and just as we've progressed to try and get the system working for us, it hasn't been kind of tidied up yet. So you'll see that there's a bit of an underspend in river management cost centers, which will contribute to offsetting some of that flood spending. So I would say just maybe don't read too much into this, and we will hopefully be in a better able to explain each section at the end of the financial year when things are a little bit more settled down with the system.
One of the challenges for us is that the budgets have been phased evenly throughout the year, whereas our work programs generally are focused on this time of the year and a bit of an uneven phasing. So we'll just sort that one out.
The implementation of that new program has caused issues through the whole council. It's not just for ICM. So I just at the start, it affected payroll at the start. So we will be dealing with it through the whole way for the last 9 months or so. So it's just, and it was never designed so well for ICM. So we're having to work hard, or the staff are having to work hard with the finance bit to make it all work and link together. So it isn't easy. So just explain that a bit better, I suppose, than just saying it is. So good. So yeah, it's been an ongoing work program, frustration and work program. Yeah. Thank you, Jody.
Thanks, Robbie. Next slide, if there's no questions on that. And we'll go to the next slide as well, onto the capital program. So those, the tables detailing some of the information is included on your page 26 of the agenda pack. And we are happy to take any questions about any details if you want, but just from a high level point of view, we have had annoyingly frequent but small rainfall since the Christmas breakup, which is affecting some of our earthworks projects. And we've had some other time delays that have affected the asset rationalization project. So our expectations with the contractors are that they will be finishing at their scheduled timeframes, and we're working with them to help them achieve that. And so at the moment, we are still looking at wrapping up on time, and both of those projects are part of the shovel ready program that's being funded in part by the MBIE, Ministry of Business. If there's any specific questions on the details of the program, I'm happy to take that now.
Yeah, Jody, just on the Kerry stop bank upgrade, I think there was a bit of a mistake. The
Oh.
consent and design, was that 497,000? Not 47,900. I did the sums backwards on across the whole project and it came to, I think it's 497 for the design and consent. How much?
That doesn't.
How much would the consent, how much was the consent for that? Just for our interest.
So the consent was obtained several years ago, but we've had some redesigns of the profile since, because it wasn't matching with what our level of service was. So we've gone through a bit of a process to correct that, which will save us a lot of money. Sorry, I don't know the exact costing of the consent, but I can get that for you.
Yeah, it's more just trying to understand how much of all our capital works and that and the cost of the consents. Is there a roundabout figure where there's a percentage of each project that the consents?
It's quite a difficult one to
Was there all different?
average, yes, and this would have been one of the more simpler ones, so I imagine that this one would have been lower. There were some architectural things to do with it, but some of the other ones where they're more complex or they're triggering different stakeholders, the costs go up. It depends on whether they just go through the process, whether they're publicly notified, whether they contested and have to go to the environment court. So it is quite, we could give an average, but it wouldn't be accurate to, I guess, make any decisions on or try and budget with. So we try and do that more on a case by case basis.
A lot of it's not like consent to add to the requirements around trying to achieve it. So the archaeological thing, we got notified by the local happy that there might be a noodle bar down on that site. So we had to do a geomagnetic survey because they thought there's two burials. I think we found 42 or something in that location. But we had to do that for Heritage New Zealand and everything else to do it. So it's really the ancillary stuff around the consent that usually costs more money, but yeah, averaging it's could be a flaw.
Yeah, I was just sort of asking just more for the later item on our thing about sustainability long term going forward and how much impact of these consents contributing to that.
Myself and Noel can talk on this a little bit if you'd like, but Noel actually, we investigated it quite a bit in the last 6-7 months. And it's the cost of it is not actually the consents. It's what Kenny was saying. It's complying with the consents is most of the big.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and really the underlying theme from council is the consent cost about $1,500 to $3,000. The reports that are required under the RMA are not the consent, but they lead to gaining the consent. So that's, I've sent you the,
That's more what it's.
yeah, and that's really the issue is how long is a piece of string is, how many reports do you need to get? What is it you need to get? And so council has maintained, in my words, not theirs, we've got a standard cost for consent, which is around about that 15 to 3,000, 1,500 to 3,000, but all the other reports, that's not us, that's the RMA. So, you know, it may be a play on words, but anyway, I've sent you the report that I received the OA request that I ended up doing.
Thanks, Mike.
And it centres more so on the other side, but there's costs in that. So anyone else would like that, I'm happy to hear it. Yeah. Maybe you would just send it out like you did to the Waikato Committee, send it to the Hauraki. And it may not be exactly on Hauraki, but it will give you the flavour of the issues. Yeah.
And just to address your question about the costings, those are accurate. There was quite a bit of survey that was done in the design phasing, and we have had to revisit the design a couple of times now to get the level of service correct, so.
Yeah, that's like Margaret just came from coming, carrying her.
Yeah.
Talking about all numbers.
I think that's the last piece of the White House scheme to be completed.
So any other questions on the capital program?
How are we getting along with the new, the asset restoration at, Shelley Beach? Are we, having issues there, or is it moving on, or?
So it's moving on. There's been a couple of hiccups with the contractor. But from what I've been told, the program is still on schedule, and the contractor, I mean, it's in their contract, the timeframes, and our project manager's been quite good at making them honor that, because we know how important getting these this new system going and start to get some of those floodgates decommissioned is for the scheme and the protection of the area.
And the foreshore east-west bank, has that been resolved now with Hauraki? Or are we still discussing the rail trail and health implications of it? Is that been sorted now?
So the Rail Trail Trust have built a goats track on the landward side of the stop banks to enable the work to take place. We've had a number of non-compliances with public jumping back up onto the stop bank and entering the active work areas that the contractors have had to deal with, which hasn't been great. And so we were just working through it best we can. Really, the agreement is past its date for renewal by about a year, so we'll be looking at doing that this year, and working through that with Hauraki District as well.
So writing a new policy.
It should be a refresh of the existing agreement, but if there's certain descriptions or clauses in there that aren't clear enough, maybe, or aren't working for either party, then we'll look to update those and make them clear, because there has been a couple of instances where the intent of the wording has been one thing when the agreement was set, but it's not ultimately clear, and now we have a disagreement on what it actually means, so.
It's on trajectory to move those to the east, and should be completed today in terms of level and getting re-established. The conversation we're going to go, so for those that don't know the area we're talking about really from Coker Bridge around to the Hauraki River on the foreshore. In our upcoming work program in the next LTP, we've actually got the linkages from the foreshore frontage back to the state highway. So we'll be requesting HCC put the temporary cycle trail down there for a short time, so we get that upgraded just to get to the foreshore piece down at Barney Foot by the new place, Roger. Just so they don't have to put it on and take it off again. And it's only going to be a couple of years and that piece will be upgraded, but that way it can continue without being interrupted. So there's 2 points like that, it's that one, and where the marshals is going up the Piako, heading around to Waikaparu. But the main foreshore piece of, was it 14 to 5Ks at one end and 14 at the other will be done. So, yeah, and that's also future protected, got the preloading for any sea level rise or climate change already completed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Just the condition on the side of the stopping on that same asset where it's been mowed and failed 2 years in a row now, and I've had to go along to either a contract or something and say the bales have ended up in the drain.
Yeah.
And all we needed is an event, and that bale blocks the first culvert because that won't go through a culvert. I don't think that is a very good outcome. The contractor seems to, I'm talking about the agricultural bailout contractor, seems to stack them on the edge of the drain. That's going to just roll into the drain. So then regional council or whoever has to come along at their cost with a digger and get bloody things out. So if it is going to be, I think it's flawed as it is now. If it is going to be bailed in the future, it's going to be a better system. and better controls in there, because no one drives along the drain, and has a look, right on the top of the stop back, and the drains over there. I go along the drain, checking drains, and like last year and this year, 2 bales stuck in the drain, about the same places as last year.
Are they for the erosion control? Because they did put them in the drain to stop the drain.
No, these were bales, these were baled wreck bales, and they were floating in the drain.
Move on then, if there's anything else. Next slide. Oh yeah, that's just details of the program. You can move forward. Yeah, and those are just the summaries of the land license inspections. We've
Thank you.
Thank you. The approach that we're trying to take is there's a number of items that have been outstanding for, well, there's not that many actually, for more than 5 years. So we're going to be clearing those off first and then looking at addressing some of the more historic ones. Unless there's, a major concern for the integrity of the stop bank. So looking at cleaning those up. We've got a new land license officer started in maybe just before Christmas. Her name's Sarah Muir, and she's by all accounts seems absolutely fantastic. So I'm really confident that her interactions with the landowners and the way that we will be communicating will continue on from kind of where we've gotten to, trying to communicate early and openly with changes that are coming. The licenses are coming up for renewal in another year, I believe. So we'll be starting to look at the process of reviewing the agreements, and I think the process that we worked last time with, I think it was yourself, Connell, and Robbie, gave us some input into the agreements and how we are going to package those and send those out. I think we'll look to do something similar again. But the Waikato side letters are coming up at the same time, or similar time for renewal. So we'll be doing them together so that we've got kind of the same thing on each side. There will be one kind of major change that we'll need to incorporate into the new letters, depending on some of the timing with what the government is doing and our license renewals regarding the freshwater NPS regulations, just around wetlands and things like that. So we are going through a process to see where in our system we have got current licenses that are on wetlands, and we're just getting the information now and going to say, okay, well, now what do we need to do? Because the ruling and the new regulations is that everything needs to be fenced or stock excluded by 2025. So unless the government changes that, those regulations are still standing and we need to abide by them as they sit. So just a heads up that that's something that we are looking at, and we'll try and communicate as much as possible kind of ahead of making any changes so that everyone's aware and understands. Any questions on any of that? Yes, Con.
It's great. We've actually got this information in front of us. We can see what's going on and what's happening and what's not happening. And I guess one of the motivations was its concerns that things weren't being addressed, and I'd have to say it's quite alarming. And I don't know the magnitude of the issues, but if you look before 2019, there's 17 stock damage or structural damage items that haven't been addressed. That's 5 years. Now, I presume that Kenny's team, going along with, they saw things that were actually impacting the structural integrity of the stock bank. There must be some way to escalate that, but I just have to say, it's great we've got the information. I'm really pleased to hear that you're sort of focusing on the worst ones, but I think you mentioned 6, and I can see 17 just on that graph. So is there a work program to
to actually address this, or is it just sort of going to happen when somebody's got time?
No, this has been the most follow-up I've ever seen with Sarah on board. We've had a lead license person for a period. But the trend is definitely coming down. The ones that you see up there will be more minor ones. In terms of not huge concern, will be landslide minor defect, because the big one would get it straight away. We probably had a couple of more extreme damage ones last winter, like 1 or 2 sites that were probably up in scale, probably up with the worst I've seen, which we dealt with pretty quickly and we've got a lot of phone calls about. Other than that, it's mainly minor ones, other than there's been a big increase in issues with around mine wires, and that's been constructed. One got constructed 30 metres from our pump station and diesel tank, facing straight at it. We had to get them to move. Another one dug up a stop bank out to build a mine wire in the bank down a Canal Road. So that's been challenging. All been fixed, but it seemed to be a difference this year than previous years. It's starting to ramp up for some reason. So heading basically.
So what I'm hearing is it's not actually quite as alarming as it could look if there's minor matters.
Yeah, exactly. And we just completed our capital work program. So the last 2 months of this year, we've actually focused on cleaning up our defects because we need to get our own back house in order as well. So the numbers should be significantly less next year. And there's big proactive management with landowners. I don't know if any leaseholders here have seen any letters we've had anything come out, but there's been more follow-up now than I've seen in 9 years. So it's been great.
Well,
I can add a little bit into that, Connell. I did a couple of drives myself around the Hauraki Plains this winter in meetings and that, and I ran staff a couple of times when they're at Cook's Landing, and you could see cattle clogging stock banks, and it was a complete mess. And Kenny said, yes, we've already seen it, and the guy won't do anything about it. And I said, well, you know, you need to get on his back, because otherwise he shouldn't even have a lease agreement. So I think staff have taken this on a lot more than what we have in the past. So
And I passed on.
yeah. So I think everybody is aware, and I don't think you're marking on anyone. Just you don't appreciate your capital you're investing in to be wasted that way. We're all invested in it.
You know, it's a real threat.
Yeah.
To the integrity of
Our flood protection scheme.
Yeah, and but it's probably the next step, and I honestly don't think we're there yet. I'd like it to be, but we still see 10 o'clock in the morning on particular wet mornings, cows break fence multiple times.
Yeah, I agree.
It's absolutely a minority, but at some stage it would be great to get to a place where we could identify that and be really serious. Like if someone says, I'm not going to do anything about it, that's pretty much the end of his lease. I would have or her lease. But I don't know that that's quite the case.
It wasn't that case, but with this exact conversation come up in our latest, this week we had a catch up with the land license team about it's week come for a drive, because we've got one base in our area now, so she can come over and she's all for it. I'll get out there, have a look. I'm not trying to go around with a big stick with anyone, but just you need to, you know, if they do it 2 or 3 times, then might change. But you know, just trying to get their compliance up really.
And it's animal use at the time of the year. Like the guy at Neverton had bull and heifers on stock banks.
Yeah.
Behind a brake fence.
I'm glad that was addressed.
Yeah, no, it was addressed the day I drove past. I can tell you that now. Yeah. Anyway, no, I think all of Hauraki staff has taken that on board, and they are all working hard to make sure that these incidents are reported and noted all the time. It's definitely been something I've heard a lot more about this year than ever before.
And the real measure of success is when land lease owners are leasing it amongst themselves. Yeah. Which I think hopefully won't be far away if this process keeps continuing. Yeah. Which is good. Good point.
Good questions. And I think that might be it for me. There's, if you go forward to the next, that's just broken down, defects by types. That's on page 26. Your pack, and that's essentially the same information, just put into a picture for those of you that like pie charts. And I think that might be me. Yes, it is.
Thanks, Jackie. We'll hand over to Ruben for one through an update on land drainage.
Yes,
Thanks.
can we
Oh,
just
sorry.
have some questions around? Oh, Jay's been, is it?
Yep, go for it.
Because it gives a lot of information in the report, and thanks for you and the team putting it together. But just on page 13.9b, it's talking about the Hauraki River modelling. There's obviously a bit of work still to do there. Are we talking 6 months work or 5 years work?
No, it should be a couple of months, should it not?
Yeah, so what's happened is we've essentially finished the modeling, but in doing so, we've some of the areas around the ponding zone 1, kind of on the western side of the peak dome.
Yeah, it covers it. I think you've explained it pretty well.
Oh, have I? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so about probably 6 months. We just need to get some survey out and get a little bit better understanding. And then because the model's already done, essentially, they just need to put in the new information, get it out.
Sort of reassuring it, right? You finished it actually. There's a bit there that we could, it would be better if we go back and look at.
Yeah, because the
Thank
rain
you for doing the job for it.
stopping through that area. But one challenge with it is that that whole mineralized zone is underwater still. So
Yeah.
trying to survey that is almost impossible. So what we're doing is trying to survey what we can, getting historic data, Department of Conservation, send us information, what they've got, user groups, send us information. So we're trying to get as much in as we can because the LiDAR shows it from the river edge being like a meter out to pick up grass sake and rising from there where it actually dips. And in a designed flood event, 50% of the water actually flows overland through that area, and above design one up to 90% can. That's exactly what was observed in 2017 and what members like John and others have been talking about in this committee for a few years now. So it's quite good that it's calibrating and actually showing exactly what occurs. So this is just trying to make it as good as it can be, and it's more of a living model now. So we just keep building on the models rather than rebuild it every time. So it's just keep improving.
So point 14, I thought was quite a relevant one. It sort of says that this Hauraki scheme subcommittee is considered as stakeholders in terms of the climate change adaptation process, planning process. So is there any way we can just make sure that that stays, that we continue being, and it's not forgotten?
Yeah, so we're I'm sit on the working group for the panel or the project, I guess, along with David Plum and I think is involved at some point as well with HDC. So yes, I'm making sure that that is still listed. I've just in the last week started hearing some media advertisements on the radio around Hauraki is going to be starting to go out and look at forming these community panels. So I'm hoping that a little bit more information will be released shortly. But I think David, it might be available on the website, a little bit of information.
It is. As you say, we've had one event at Natia and another focusing on schools. Focusing on schools is essential.
Don't you worry, I'm waving a flag.
Yeah, that's
Hard.
good. And when the time comes for feedback or input, we'll probably have to think quite hard about how this committee participates, because we're meeting a couple of times or 3 times a year. It'll be matters of timing. We just, whether we need to have a sort of side group or small workshop or whatever around it. Just, I think we should be cognizant that's something that we might need to think about.
Yeah, and whether we want to have an informal group or if people get nominated, Robbie might have some.
I want just speak to that for a second.
Yep.
Myself and Benjamin, Councillor Smith and Councillor Mayor have been appointed to the Hauraki climate adaptation plan, is it there? So you've got us there anyway on that committee. So And, oh, sorry, councillor Hodges on the floor, not me. No,
I stepped aside for a while.
yeah.
Look, I think that's really sensible and that's really good.
Yeah.
But it's still important that this.
Oh, you know, I totally agree.
Has the opportunity to
Yeah.
reflect and give the perspectives of this whole group.
And Conal, while the mandate for this committee, subcommittee was 2 or 3 meetings per year, Bobby and I have always held the very strong view that should we need to meet, we will meet as a full subcommittee or as an informal subcommittee to do what we need to do. So you have our reassurance that if it needs to, we will.
It's probably good for the committee to be aware, because if an email comes in 3 months' time and, hey, look, it would be valuable for us to get together to discuss our perspectives on this initial plan. It actually doesn't look important, but actually this.
Yeah, no, totally agree.
Yeah. Just for you, through you, Mr. Chairman, just providing context. So this adaptation project that Hauraki are running through is sort of modelled off, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Wharekāua Coast project, the 2120, which looking through, and also Thames Environmental Council went through the shoreline management plan process as well, using the same adaptive approach. It's based on the MFE model that was piloted in the Hawke's Bay, which was quite successful, bringing them together the community/council partnership approach. So that's sort of I guess the genesis for it too. So it has some really good foundation. But take your point, Conal, about just making sure that the scheme's interests are represented around that table at the right time. So take that on board. Thank you.
We have been proactive in shoulder tapping a few of the local communities such as yourself on.
Yeah, and that's good too, but that's, there's a different perspective.
Yeah.
That this committee can provide.
And like Jodie said, she's got a really good handle on getting that through with it, and obviously the staff level with David and that Hauraki district. So good hands.
Yeah, and yourself being on that Hauraki Golf Forum at that stage, you'd be vital to some of the input you can put into it.
It's a perspective I can provide that others might not be able to.
Yeah.
But there's a diversity of perspectives and that makes these processes valuable. Just one of the other things was in the emerging issues is talk about the concern about urban development going into what's been previously pastoral use. There's more to this than there appears, because it seems on the face of it pretty simple. Surely once a subdivision happens, the responsibility goes from regional council to district councils.
Not that easy, Conal.
Yeah, so is there anything we could or should be doing about that? Because it's in terms of practicality, that's what needs to happen.
After this meeting, someone was a meeting on the very subject in relation to Kofi, which is just northwest of Hamilton. And that's where you've got the Sarapa drainage district, or from the Sarapa Drainage Board. We've got old days. Where the Porters subdivision out there at the north end of Hamilton is in the headwaters of the Mangaheka stream. And then the water goes up to Kofi, and you've got the Kauai Drainage District, which joins into the Mangaheka stream. But you've got the urban development there, which the regional council warned the district that it was subject to ponding, so that they should look at the building heights. And that wasn't really taken much notice of. And so now you've got a subdivision where the drains, which were nice and straight, are now dog-legged around houses and whatever. And the roads become the stream and the water passage. And the last couple of rain events have had water right up to the garage doorways, basically, of the dwellings. So that is right in our mind at the moment. Where some was a meeting afterwards, but it's if you look at I've got the draft of the consultation document for the long-term plan here. That comes out on the 2nd of April for a month. That work has not been funded, this long-term plan, which really concerns me. But the reality is, for some of us, it's a real issue that we've got to deal with now and come up with solutions. So it's not only unique to this catchment or the Whitehill, it's Waikato, Lower Waikato particularly. So it's an issue that we may have to think. And look, come time for the submissions, I would really, I can't, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but whether we need to rethink that we should be doing some more formal work with the territorial authorities. So I don't know whether you want to say some more on that, Adam? Or...
To you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think you've summarised it well, Noel. So there is a more strategic look going on regionally. So the Te Kaupō situation is case in hand. And I think that's a really good example of, I guess, where there's been a bit of a disconnect, I guess, with ourselves and in the district. Ruben, don't want to steal his thunder, but he's been doing quite a lot of work behind the scenes, just around euthanisation policy, which obviously includes Thames Valley, just some of the matter sprawl that we've seen as well, the Peria Road drain, for example. Some of you might remember that we actually did a formal handover of suburban outlet here in Te Araha a couple of years ago through Matamata Piako District Council. And so there is a process. We know what the process is. It is complicated. It's not a 5-minute job. You do have to go through a council handover. But rest assured the conversations are happening and we're trying to get in early on the process now before land gets zoned, land gets developed. We're also working with Waka Kotahi as well, around the expressway, around Parapa and obviously around east of Hamilton, because drainage is often seen as sort of sometimes, oh, I forgot about that. So we want to make sure that we're elevating that at the right level so we can get it right up front in those initial planning conversations. So we're not having to chase our tails and retrospectively trying to manage our drainage after the facts. So, yeah.
And just for that particular one, Te Kaupō, there has been an independent report commissioned by the District Council that shows in strong terms that the drainage levels of service that removed water within 3 days is actually working. But your problem is you've got an urbanisation in the drainage district. The drainage, I'm downstream of that. So the concern for us as rural ratepayers is that that water can't come through because it's all now on hard stand coming into the drainage district, which is through channels that are designed, you know, fall on the ground and gradually make its way to the drain, suddenly being through. And the same with Porters we've got there with the Mangaheka. So that's where it becomes complicated, is how do the district retain the water through detention ponds, which they're going to have to buy land for, and hold the water and feed it through the drainage network through the rural network. So the rural network don't want to be paying for the urbanisation. So that's where the complications start.
And in any hard catchment, create an urbanisation to a hard catchment, be it a tin roof or road, that's the big problem going forward. That I see will be a big issue in the next 50 years.
Yeah, and it's region wide.
Totally. Yeah, you can put a new road in, that will get into a flood protection scheme a lot faster than we've used to.
Yeah. So it's not a simple answer, but it is very much important.
And the other thing that's easy to get from the CJ stuff is involved, the faster the water gets into the drain, the bigger impact it has on the life that's in the drain.
Yes.
Once you get 30% of a catchment hard surface, effectively you remove 80 or 90% of the life of the drains because the water's too fast. I look, the last thing I've done was sort of read.
Anything, can I interrupt? What we should be doing as council is testing the water as it comes out of that drainage area of that urban area for minerals and all the other things, because I don't think you realise how much contaminants are actually in that compared to even farmland. It's really major. We should be doing it as a council, testing them, because then you can go to the say, you might be getting rid of the water that's full of carbon products, you know, diesel products, all sorts of things.
And that's the issue. We have raised that with the Mangaheka, with the Porters subdivision there, because of the commercial, you know.
You don't raise it, do the testing yourself,
yeah,
improve it. That's what you've got to do. So it's no different than when we do riparian plantings.
Yeah.
We've got no knowledge of it really. If we start doing it from upstream right down, are we actually benefiting? And I would suggest that the farmers in this country actually doing a bloody good job. Good enough. So we really need to push that as regional councils.
Yeah, and look, when we did the Mangaheka Porter subdivision, that was the issue is that came up from the landowners was, you know, during times of excess rain, those heavy metals, all that stuff's washing into that detention pond. Are they being retained in the pond or are they coming out into the network and then over our pasture? So all that was addressed at the time. So I do believe somewhere along should be getting done. If it's not, I'll follow it up. But that should be part of the, yeah, and anything like that when they,
Absolutely.
yeah, as part of this.
Before and after, actually.
So in back here on that, in the early 2000s, regional council, like for most of people's time, had done a study of the Waikato River above a bridge and below a bridge. They did that in the dry and then after it rained. And the nutrient loadings, especially N, skyrocketed after rain. The N comes, a lot of N comes from tyre wear and oil for vehicles. And it just between up and like some of the system, someone don't ask me where, but I had the availability of reading that back in 2004. So it was quite an eye opener then. So it's not going to get any better.
It's one of my pet hobbies. Just because I've got so much sort
Just one more point, it relates to points 28 to 30, and it's talking about consents to clean drains effectively, and I know it's an ongoing thing. But the last point, in the meantime, physical work will proceed in areas where we meet this criteria and have clear direction. So the implications, there's some areas that won't be able to be cleaned. And I'm guessing that is just what it is, but are the ratepayers or people that are going to be affected by those drains not being cleaned, are they aware that the drain might not be going to do what they would expect? So is there a notification process for the people that might be adversely affected?
There's none in our area, but
No. So, through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll maybe Ruben can elaborate. So I guess that we've been doing quite a bit of work trying to map out what the NES 2020 regulations mean. That's around the drains within 200 metres of the wetland, drains that go through a wetland versus those drains that go parallel to a wetland. So we've done quite a bit of work to just to decipher if does that clause apply. So a little bit of work and getting some ecological advice. We've confirmed that where our drains do, certainly for here around the Kaipūatai, that we can continue with our work in the meantime. We do have the ability for putting the spoil onto a paddock, or where the drain goes through what might be perceived to be a wetland. It's actually not a wetland because it's got plant species. So it's not about land ownership, it's around what type of vegetation is there. So we've got confirmation, we worked that through with Doc. So Kenny's right. So Thames Valley, we're generally okay. I guess where we're having to work through a little bit more complicated is the around like Waikari, where the drains do dissect through a natural wetland area. But again, the ecologists there have helped us confirm that. Around the species of plant that's there, not about who owns the land. So it's a case by case basis. There may be some spots around the region where we just have to be careful. We go and see the work, do the due diligence first. But for the major work that we've got, remember that a fair assessment that we're currently get the work done.
I guess the situation is that all wetlands were going to be, I guess, met by 2030 in the area. So that's a long disjointed in time. So what we've done is said the drainage networks are important to us. They're critical to us, and our mandate here is to make sure they keep operational and efficient and working to support our targeted rate base. Clear in my vision, that's what we've got to do. And some of that is about actually going to the draining and saying, well, actually, this is critical infrastructure that's there, it's already there, and it's actually a drain, it's not part of the wetland. So the species in it, not wetland species, and the water flows through it. It's actually might be flowing through the wetland, but it's actually not part of the wetland. So if it's not part of the wetland, NES does not count. And that includes the tracks. So it's actually critical to know that, get in there, maintain your drain and your access track long term. It's critical that we do that so that it maintains us not acquiescing into a wetland just by not maintaining. So yeah, so it's a case by case basis, but I think we've got the main ones covered.
It's somewhat reassuring to hear, having read that.
I think it's just like a step back, be a little bit more bold about it, a little bit less risk averse about it, and work at what we need to do to make sure that we keep these systems up and running and legitimate.
And there is a clause within the NEST that talks about specified infrastructure. So that's like Ruben was saying, these are authorised drains. They're there approve, authorize, so, if there are some, you know, I guess to make sure that we're interpreting the policy right, so we've now got to get through it, Connell, and make good progress.
Mr. Chairman, I just had a question on with regards to item 28, 29 as well. And on the question was just as soon as I read it, I thought, is this as a direct result of the recent prosecution by a local contract within our region? Because since that time, there's been a lot of uneasiness on the local contract.
No, so it came about through an awareness of the introduction of the NES 2020, and just us needing to step through what it means for our activities. Yeah, and what we're aiming to do is make sure that our staff and contractors have absolute surety around their operations, and what we're asking them to do. And that's what we do.
Right.
So it essentially came from a specific situation that we were able to get the staff to have another look at the decision not to go in, a relook at the regs, a relook at the site, and looking at on a site specific basis. And that has brought, what must be 9-10 months easily of some concentrated working with Robbie and I with the staff and the landowners. And I think the outcome has been a long time coming, but it's a good outcome. And I don't know, but the bucket must be going in the drain as we speak, just about, right, gentlemen?
I'm signing something today.
You're signing the document today. There you go.
It's quite interesting that there are some challenges with that local community, even do something like asked for the deposit to be put on one side of the wetland to actually help protect the wetland, but the rules don't allow it, so it has to go on the other side. So although it's doing a good thing, we are hamstrung by that. We've got to stay within the rules. So there's some challenges with that, with the way it was written or the outcome. It's not outcome written, it's just not effect. So yes, there's some challenges in that space, but we can comply, but we lose the option to do the betterment side of it.
But I also think it's a great case of where a landowner and people from former drainage districts, or former committees, and some of them are on the Lower Waikato subcommittee, but the landowners in particular, even in this committee, if there's issues that aren't really gaining the outcomes that we want, please bring them to your councillors, to this subcommittee, preferably to the councillors earlier. If you don't see it, talk to the staff, talk to the team, talk to us. We are here to help find solutions. And at the end of the day, this has finally been re-looked at and an outcome that suits all, I think. And DOC are happy because they've obviously signed the document or are going to sign it today. So, it really is incumbent on us as landowners to speak up when we think something's wrong.
I'll just add a little bit to that, because it has been 13 months we've been dealing with this. We started in February last year. It was one of the, we call it, thing passes, passes we got given as new councillors. I remember that meeting, we went upstairs on the second level and it was a blooming nightmare. So yeah, we got given a real hospital pass with this one, and these guys have been working really hard in the background to resolve this. They've been trying to deal with the rules, how they saw them at the time. And as Noel said, if it wasn't for a couple of worry old dudes on the Waikato area that has said, no, we're not going to stand for that, we're going to fight back, and they kept fighting back. And in the end, we got in a meeting and Chris McClay sat there and listened to what was going on. And it was, Chris goes, holy crap. He took it all on board, and they went and went back to these guys and they reassessed how they were evaluating it. And that's all that happened. And it just went click and everything changed. So that's why Noel was saying, if you've got issues, you need to be firm and bring them back to us and say, no, I don't believe that should work that way. And there must be a better way of doing it. And sometimes it works. And none of this was done in a disrespectful way. We just had meetings and we tried to resolve it, and a lot of cups of teas and talk sessions and sitting down with these guys a lot of the time going, and they'd come back and they'd, but this rule here still applies. And it did. That rule still applied until we changed the value of that wetland wasn't actually a wetland anymore, and then everything changed. And it took someone else's fresh eyes to see it, that could happen, and that's all it was. It was these guys weren't doing their job incorrectly. They were sticking to the letter of the law. It's just, we needed fresh eyes on it. Yeah, so if that helps you understand what went on,
It's actually useful back. Good on you all for getting
to that point, it's been hard. It hasn't been easy, and I take my hat off to Noel. He knows the RMA a lot better than I do, and he's been in there hard all the time, and I've had to back him up with what he says. We've just been hard at it, so
It's a team effort.
yeah. So thanks, Noel, for that. Yeah, you've done. Noel especially has put a lot of effort into this as a councillor, I should say.
But, you know, as I say, but it's a team and it's staff, and and look, there's some legal advice that was obtained, which when someone had fresh eyes on it, it didn't really cover what needed, and someone went and had a good look, an ecologist, and as Robbie's just alluded to, it wasn't a wetland after all. So without going into too much detail, people speaking up and not accepting no, it's a good thing. And these subcommittees, Robbie and I fought hard to get them. Ben supported us, and other councillors. We got the support to get these committees back up and running, not in the same format, but I think it's starting. And through that channel, through direct representation of these committees, I had feedback, and I'm sure Robbie has too, that people are starting to feel the value of them already. So anyway, enough on that.
Yeah.
Thanks for raising a comment.
Thank you. Adam, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess that is great, a conversation around this. I mean, up here is some, I guess, progress on what we're up to. The weather's been good. We're on track to deliver. When I say it's been good for our spray and our wet programs. It's been good for farming as well. So everybody's out there doing their stuff. In terms of the spray program, we're now up to about 95% of it being complete. The guys are telling me that there's a little bit more autumn spray out there to be done as required. So there's a bit of regrowth, and we're out there doing with our guys. So our teams are out there spraying rather than contractors, and that keeps our costs under control. Machine cleaning, we're at about 95% as well, but we're still learning from as we go through the catchment, where we've got some settling spots where it's settled out from the flushes that came through last year. So there is still work to be done there, but the teams are out there doing it. So we're on track for delivery really in the, around the area. And you would have seen the guys out around the farms and that. So I'm not hearing any bad communication. I'm hearing good communication. When I say good communication, it's if there's an issue, they ring in and we deal with it, or we have the hard conversations around it. So that's good. Good communication, not disrespectful communication going on with that. So that's really the update. The key issues, I think, for land drainage and the legitimacy of land drainage is making sure that we are getting out there, that we understand the legislation and we're in there doing the work. So that emerging issues around either any is a key issue for land drainage. And so our role is to make sure it's legitimate. We know it's legitimate, but to make sure it's effective, and it's effective and working long term. So that's the aim. I see our vision. My vision is to make that happen. So not so much on the ground, because I know we've got great teams on the ground in the Hauraki and Waikato out there doing the work, but we're at this sort of level, making sure that what you're saying is understood and then translated into our plans and into the long-term plan and that sort of thing. So those issues of this NES programs. The other one is self-administration. Some of the subs want to go self-administration, so we need a policy around that. We've developed that policy. We talked about it at this last committee meeting, and it was in its draft sort of stages. The meeting was happy that went through and that it was being championed more from the Waikato side, where they're wanting to do self-administration. They've set up their landowner group, and that we met with the landowner group, including Robbie and Noel and myself, and Adam, and went through the policy that we wanted. It's risk-based, so you have to go through some risk assessment around what the risks are to the council and to the drainage. We had named some subdivisions that potentially could go through, but what they wanted to do was it to be on a case-by-case basis, so that anyone could actually go in case-by-case and ask for self-administration. The policy has been changed to include that sort of focus in it, case-by-case, same risk matrix that you have to go through to consider it. And I guess the issue is that you can request it, but the council, it's council's full work, I guess, around that risk, and the council will need to assess an application, but does not necessarily have to grant the right to go self-administrate. There's also the option there presented in that policy that you can privatise. So privatisation of the scheme, if it's a smaller scheme, 1 or 2 landers is an option still. That's sitting with that committee for committee members wanted to have a look at it, and feedback if they wanted to at the moment. But the aim is that policy goes to ICMC meeting on the 11th of April for approval and adoption. And that gives us a policy and some guidance around how you deal with those issues consistently. So that's a bit of work there. And the other bit of work is that urbanisation. And that's the critical issue. And what you find is that it's happening around our rural towns. And because we're being successful with our farming communities, people want to live there. And people want to live there, so you've got to build more subdivisions around the outside. So sometimes we're a bit of a, the more successful are, the more issues we have to deal with. So we're sort of a victim of our own success in the farming community. But at the same time, it's got to be dealt with. It's really got to be dealt with around that. So that's a focus, and it's not an easy one. It's a multi-year one. And, we want to have a good relationship with the TAs around that, and some good understanding around it, so that there's a fair sharing of burden, I guess. We can't expect to target these issues on targeted, right? It doesn't sit there. So that's probably all. The main thrust of the land drainage report, really.
As we go forward with the urbanisation, you've got a dairy farm right next door to urbanisation. How do we cope with the effluent that the farmer puts onto his land, spray irrigation, with the smell? I mean, some of the problems with urban is the fact, bloody farmer's got effluent and it stinks like effluent. And even on our place, I can smell effluent from nearly 2 kilometres coming on the right one. But the urban will always complain after.
Yeah,
how do we cope with it as a region? We get consent from.
It's an entirely difficult one to do it, and we can see it happening now because you've got the different syndromes that go through it. You've got the NIMBY syndrome, I guess, which you hear, which is not in my backyard when you're doing something. And when you move out into the country, you're not in your backyard, you're in farmer's backyard. That's a difficult one. And then you've got the NOTE syndrome, which is not over there either. Don't go over there either. And then you've got the latest one, which is the banana one, which is built absolutely nothing, anything. So it becomes difficult for the country to be successful with sitting like that. But yeah, it's difficult.
Does it come up in council?
Urbanisation, it's been discussed a few times.
The farming. We become the province of the earth. Does it come up?
The reality, not so much, because not our biggest thing dealing with effluent was when in this term was when one staff member tried to alter policy and not make ponds at the plastic line illegal. So it was like hitting a brick wall. No, it hasn't come up. It hasn't come up in. But is there? What's the rule? As long as it's 200 metres away from the boundary, there's pretty much nothing anyone there can do about it.
150.
As a 150, yeah. So. But, like I said, we're up number 7 road and we're 8 kilometres away from Wallace's, and if it's going to rain, I can smell that 8 k's away.
yeah, there are regional rules about odour and the likes, but I was a former RMA commissioner, and you're looking at, and I was on the district council part of the region, and I was leading the Waikato district proposed district plan appeals. And one of the things I was encouraging people was, you know, when the land's subdivided, you have those reverse sensitivity rules. You know, you're moving into an urban, a rural area, and there should be caveats on the land saying you can't complain about lawful activities undertaken in a rural area. And I've just been looking at retirement options, and I see some of the areas where I was looking at have got those covenants on the land. You can't complain about the activities of the farmer.
So you're covering it in some.
Yeah, but that's really open to the developer and the district councils. It's not a regional council issue.
We've done that recently with the land that's been subdivided up by the Thames Valley Deerstalkers. They were concerned they were going to lose their right to function, but we wrote the caveats in.
Yes.
And it's a purchaser's choice.
Yeah, caveat emptor, buyer beware.
Secondly, here is
Yeah.
So just to elaborate on Mr. Noel's point, so I was an urbanite up to about 2 or 3 years ago. I moved out to the country, and I had a caveat I had to sign that, you know, I couldn't complain about farm noise, farm smells, and I was not happy that I grew up on the farm anyway, so I was just thinking the urban area for the last 20 years. But I'm saying that they're just saying that does happen.
Yes.
Yeah, so developers probably do need to take, and I think you've got Lockerbie Estate. I've got friends who own a farm next to Lockerbie Estate. And so again, it's just that expectation that, you know, we need to make sure that that interface between urban and rural. I think people need to be buyer beware.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, who's got me going, listening to all the hard work everyone does, I'm curious, do we have any say in the development in our area? But does a committee have any say of those development area? Let's say Connell wants to divvy up this farm and put a whole estate in there. Do we have any say or what goes on? I ask that because involved a little bit in GI, Glen Innes, they moved out 7,000 people, all these houses, and replaced them with 35,000. So with these properties there was one house on, they put in 7 2-story condominium things that now house 40 people. And as you can imagine, the sewers, the ways just gone stupid. Do we have any say if that happens down here? Or is that if a developer wants to do it, council?
So I think the main matter for this subcommittee would be to have the assurance that where these issues do come up, that we have the capacity and capability to engage in those processes, because we'll go into bat for our drainage schemes, for our flood protection schemes.
That's the answer.
No, beforehand, and make sure that, say, for example, this is a proposal that has a stormwater management plan, understanding exactly what that means for our assets that might be impacted, and involving ourselves as an affected party in those processes to make sure that the outcomes are good for the schemes. So I guess that's where this committee should be seeking that kind of assurance.
But it also, and I can talk from experience with the Waikato district, is that the Waikato district proactively sent to the regional council every application that is for a subdivision, saying this is what we're talking about at Te Kaua earlier on about the drainage district. And the drainage district, the regional council, that's their trigger to what Greg has just been saying. So the local territorial authority should have a system in place, and if not, that's where, like yourself or others, should be asking for them to notify. And so the regional council, I know with Waikato district, but I'm hoping that all the other district councils do the same, so that it triggers some sort of response, as it did with for Te Kaua, when Roger Spooner said, don't do it, or unless you raise the building height, do this, that, ignored it. So now the cost is on the district.
Well, it's the same sort of thing that's got where it's where they're looking for one place, you got 3. And then I watched the development at Te Kaua. Like that's getting huge.
Don't talk to me about that.
You know, that's far away from us, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it was Winton, and then they got the subdivision, and they sold it to Kainora.
Yeah, so the process is working to a certain degree, because we do have a good relationship with, Matamatliaka and with Waikato District. There's also some rules that trigger the requirement to look. So if there's anything going on in the land drainage district, normally we will get to know about it if it's a certain size. And then what we would go in there and make sure that it's not affecting the land drainage system that's there. And some of the things that are imposed is that you have to attenuate the flows up to a 10-year storm, you hold and you store on site. So there's definitely a working relationship between the councils, the TAs and the Waikato Regional Council. So we're aiming to be in there before they build, and that we have those easements in place, that we have the understandings in place so the drainage scheme can continue to work in those areas. And then we get that into the consent, and that's the requirement of the subdivision when they construct to do it. Then there's also going to be the discussion about actually that subdivision within the urban subdivision, rural residential subdivision within that drainage scheme, that bit needs to go to the territorial. So there's those two streams of work that we're looking at. But there is, we get to see a lot of applications and look after the duty of care, I guess, from the beneficiaries of land drainage. Because our role there is to make sure land drainage stays there and works.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a lot of it from the TA comes down to consent conditions, whether it's non-notifiable, partially notified, or publicly notified. In which case, publicly notified, everyone has the right to submit. Partially is those that are affected within a small area, and non-notified.
We you have. It's one property that's been, I think it's a 400-acre property that's been totally sprayed out, totally dead before they replant and pine. So do they approach you and say, hey, we're going to put pines here, we're going to have a whole lot of runoff until they get established? Do they apply through RMA or what? How does that work?
It would depend on how the activity is covered by the RMA. So every situation will be different. I'm not sure how that particular situation is covered. I know there are some quite specific rules around forestry operations, the discharges that come off those sites. But we'd have to have a look at that specific site. Yeah, it does vary.
I see streams, I have two running through one property. When they actually start harvesting pines, pumps block up, pine needles are everywhere, they just go through the whole system. I just wondering whether we're putting better rules in place to say, hey, you actually have to have, say, 50 metres of native material that traps some of this runoff before it actually enters the waterways.
It doesn't seem to be, because out at northwest Waikato, some of the pines are planted less than 2 metres from the streams, and neighbours have complained and whatever, they haven't been taken out. So it doesn't, I wouldn't say there was rules to.
I just wonder whether we have any rules in place that these guys can manage it a little bit better.
So there are rules around forestry operations. Again, it depends on the nature of the activity in the land in terms of what applies and what doesn't. There's national rules, I think, as well. There might be national standards for forestry. And that follows some of the concern around the slash that we've seen going down and other parts of it.
But there also was a working group, Gabriel and Hawke's Bay, to dealing with slash and stuff like that, and the outcomes. Yeah, I don't know where that's got to, but I think that was going to make rules again about forestry.
The national plan, whether we have a regional plan that says that if you plant pines within our area, this is what you have to adhere to.
At the moment, I don't think there's much. I don't think so.
Rainer, for example, over in Coromandel, they're actually taking this stash away. They've just done forestry harvesting in Hauraki there, and they've cleaned it all up. But the runoff will still come.
Is it an action point that we could ask Rudd or Tracy and her team is because they're looking at freshwater management, and yeah, that's, I think there'd be a link that we could look at asking perhaps Tracy and her team, Bruce, about going forward. New rules.
I just want to acknowledge the point that Peter just raised there, right here doing that. They did that off the back of our Kuwaiti forest harvest. We did that as a trial site to show you how it can be done more sustainably and use that to station that. And after we actually got returns for that, promoted that. So that was a WRC led initiative.
And I knew that.
Yes.
Yes.
But anyway, thanks for bringing it up.
It looks good, but it's, they still got rough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mr. Chair, I had a couple of. It's just wanted to get clarification on. I wanted to support George. It was the rules around forestry operations. I've seen firsthand the damage in Gisborne. And I do think that it'd be really good to have something in place before it became an issue rather than after. So I'm curious what's said there. The question I have is around how does the subcommittee get involved in the land use changes? Especially the public being notified once, but what is the mechanism? What, when something comes up or coming up, how's that clear to us so that we need to have our say and be involved?
So, through you, Mr. Chairman, so the general process of there's a zoning of land proposal, and it's largely through the district council because they hold that through the district plan under RMA. If it's a subdivision consent, stormwater consent, we have through our regional resilience team, they will be, and they'll work quite closely with our SPY strategic policy group. So that we're in run when there are consents that they will trigger that actually there's an ICM interest here or a flood scheme interest or a land drainage interest. So they will pass it through to operational teams and we make sure that we review, and some of it requires some engineering assessment too, because you get quite a lot of reports that are quite thick. And we will work through that and we will provide comment back through that chain to ensure that any potential impact that might be on our schemes is explained or flagged, and then we work through that back up through the resource consent process. Is that what you're sort of asking, Peter?
Well, so through you, Mr. Chair, I was asking about that because it's great that it comes down to that operational level.
Yes.
This really here doesn't.
I guess if there was any issues of significance in the catchment, they could be reported through. But the committee itself, it's more for an information view because those decision-making processes do often go at a staff level in both TAs and regional councils. That's so I think we'd certainly need to give you guys a heads up if there's anything in particular of note. That'll be impacting the schemes. Otherwise, it's our BAU, it's our day-to-day stuff that we do in terms of representing those interests, the interests of the schemes.
The issue you've got to remember is under our terms of reference on page 3, you've got the responsibilities of the committee and the powers of the committee. So if it's outside of that, it's not our core function. And some of our colleagues were quite particular about what these committees were to be set up for. So if it falls outside of the terms of reference, responsibilities and powers, I would see it as the committee could take an action point to have someone else look at it, as opposed to if it's not within the scope, then we can only ask for someone else to look at it through the staff. But I don't want to put a dampener on what was, because to me, there's things that will matter that weren't foreseen, and we need to be able to raise them somehow.
Yeah, and so my question is about how will we know that it's happening? Will we know when? And not what are we going to do about it? I think that's a separate issue. If it doesn't impact in terms of it's really just that awareness.
So for me, again, that comes back to the reporting, and if we don't pick up anything significant, I mean, it certainly wouldn't be every single piece that will change, but if there's anything significant happening in our catchments.
Just with the forestry thing, going back now to discussions in council,
we had huge discussions over, pine, plantations. But it's sort of all gone on the back burner since the 2021 water regulations have been stalled, So,
Yeah,
and because we were actually looking at doing some regulations or something within those.
yeah, and I'm not sure where it is, but those of you who will recall, Wairua District Council got a forestry rate into their district plan, whatever, or into their long-term plan. That was when I think it's under appeal at the High Court at the moment by landowners and forestry groups. So I think everyone's looking and waiting to see what the outcome of that is, because as I understood it, the first look at it, it's the High Court supported Wairua, but I'm not sure where it is at the moment. If anyone else knows where it's at, and it's really over to the territorial authorities, not the regional council, to regulate. And the main thing there was roads were being destroyed, but forestry is only, there's a 2 or 3 year window of forest being harvested. And not a lot of other traffic. And the argument was always put up that over a lifetime of that 25 years, a dairy farm has more visits by trucks than tankers than the forestry harvesting. So I don't want to go into the mechanics of it, but I think it's still within the courts is where that's got to rating. And so, but rules, that's probably a regional plan.
With those plantings, like Peter, I got the opportunity to go down to Hawke's Bay and look at all the damage they've done there. There was a lot of news around all the plantings and slash taking out a lot of bridges around Napier and all that. When we actually reviewed it, it would be interesting if you grab the report of that, because in that area it wasn't Gisborne was. In that area was predominantly catchment plantings that were done by the catchment board that took out 12 bridges. So that soft engineering and all that, it needs to be taken into context around flood protection and all of that, because the most significant damage that happened in there was caused by trying to go more environmental or natural ways to manage it, and that was the impact. People died. So there was huge impact from that, and it needs to be understood about what caused that, because that wasn't screamed out in the media that that was what the cause was, but that was truly the outcome of that. I've got a presentation on it that I've done to staff when I come back. Myself and Sam went down and had a look, but there was a lot of lessons learned from down there that need to be shared and replicated really.
Now, I guess the other thing with the Hawke's Bay issue is that you do get up to those major storms, and the way that your ground operates and the forest you put on is slightly entirely different to what slash does. So what actually came down was the whole trees. So the whole landscape moved, not just the slash that was sitting on the ground. It's a different issue to, so I went down there privately a couple of times just to have a look myself, just through interest. And there's whole pine trees move, not, so once the land goes away under such a deluge of those things, so that whole concept of using forestry to be stabilizing has its limits as well. Very beneficial, but has its limits. And I guess as a group here, we talk about here, and if you bring it back to something like property rights, then it's being able to do what you need to do on your property while meeting good environmental standards. So, at the same time, we just remind ourselves we've got property rights that to the best of your environmental protection and standards.
Oh, no, my question was sort of like Peter and supporting John there, just around land use change, understanding land use change. So yeah, you guys have sort of covered that up. So. Cool.
I forgot to introduce Mike Scarisbrook. He's actually online, so he's probably listening to this conversation as well. Mike's our water manager or regional council. So, but we will. We've taken on board the comments around the forestry side of things, and I think we can follow up through the regional plan requirements on that, and maybe report back on whether there's other. But I guess it's just got to be careful, I guess, with the remit of this committee. But we have to follow up with our counterparts and see where we go, Mr. Chairman. If you like. Unless Mike's got anything to say, but he's not there. I can see his face. Yeah, okay. Sorry about that, Mike. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, nothing to add. Nothing to add at this stage. Thanks, Adam. But I think, yeah, that whole question about different land uses and their impacts and how they're managed is a really important one.
Right.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. Oh. Very good. Work program report of flood protection, river management, Hauraki zone, and the Tinsley drainage. The report. Work program report and flood protection, river management, and Hauraki. Kings Valley drainage and Hauraki scheme of 10th of March 2024 to receive. And the action will email consent costs to be sent out to the committee as discussed, and a request for SPI to provide information about rules and regulations to develop land use changes and forestry operations and further and future changes. So I hope that covers those actions that we all talked about. Okay, so if we're ready to move with that. Second. All in favour? Against?
And the weather allows it to happen.
I think you got your mic on, mic on.
So do you agree?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to present to you the long-term plan paper today. And I guess there's three main areas that I'd like to talk about. One is our infrastructure strategy, which has obviously got a really important relevance to what we think about around this table. The second one is around the long-term plan budgets for the land drainage and flood protection activities going forward. And the third part is some areas of new investment that council is proposing through the long-term plan while they sit outside of flood protection and land drainage. We hope would have picked up from the report that they are very relevant to what we do around this table. So what I'll do is I'll go through each of those areas one by one. Mr. Chairman, I'll provide some introductory comments and then we'll just for a bit of Q&A before we move on. So first of all, infrastructure strategy. So this is something that council needs to do. We required by the local government to prepare one of these every 3 years with a long-term plan. Be our third or fourth one, I think. Minimum duration is 30 years, but we do 50 years because of the nature of our infrastructure. It is long-term investments that we make. The infrastructure strategy that's being proposed as part of this long-term plan is quite different to our previous one, because some of our initial discussion with councillors identified the fact that we talk about a lot of the pressures that are on our infrastructure programs, particularly around affordability. We know that costs to maintain our infrastructure is going up. We know costs to renew infrastructure is going up. We know that there are a number of environmental pressures on our infrastructure as well that we need to adapt to. So what we have been really pushed to do is actually put forward an infrastructure strategy that signals a bit of a transition for council, moving away from simply keeping on renewing to actually more of a focus on when we have some big investments coming up, big pump stations, big investments in stop banks, etc. Having some really meaningful conversations with the community around actually, is this the right thing to do going forward? Because say, for example, if we're investing in a $7, $8, $9 million pump station now, it's effectively committing the community to sustaining that pump station over the next 50 years. And to do that, the community has a business. You know, it's your own businesses that actually sustain the costs that come with that infrastructure. So what we've signalled is that we do need to start having some of those conversations to actually identify what actually does make sense in the long run. And it's identifying that it may well be that maintaining existing level of service may be the right thing to do. It may be that a mixture of solutions may actually be the right thing to do as well. Every asset's going to be different. So every asset's got different sort of pressures on it. Some in the Hauraki Plains obviously particularly susceptible to some changes in sea level, already quite low in that space. Other assets will have different drivers around PCL, etc. I think the best way to convey that is if you have a look on page 40 of your agenda. Down the bottom there's some pie charts, and these are just they're not detailed, they're not precise. They, I guess, show a shift that we expect that council will be needing to make over the next 30, 50 years. And what it shows is that, basically at the moment we do largely focus on renewing our assets and maintaining the scheme. But over the coming years, we will need to start to shift away from relying on that approach and more having some of those more, I guess, thorough discussions with the community. So that's the diagram, that purple pie charts. Have you got in front of you? So it's important one. The diagram is important because it's certainly not a flick the switch. This is a transition. It's about actually starting to prioritise some of our big investments that are coming up. I mean, to give you an idea, we've got 110 million infrastructure investment planned over the next 10 years. So it's big biggies. We are seeing our infrastructure being increasingly complex as well. So it's a really important one. What the infrastructure strategy is signalling that we need to have those conversations. It's not saying what solutions will be, and I think it's a really important point to make. I know in the Waikato subcommittee there's some concern about, is this effectively saying what the outcomes to those conversations will be? It's absolutely not. But what it is just signalling kind of things that we will have to think about as a community going forward, because ultimately this is about helping the community to have a sustainable infrastructural system going forward, and it's not just over the next few years. It's looking up for years. So I have provided you the infrastructure strategy in its entirety in the document. So it's attached to this from page 39 onwards in your agenda. We will be releasing this as a proposal as part of the long-term plan. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to just pause there for a second to see if there are any particular matters of interest for the infrastructure strategy.
Any questions? No, I've just got one. So going, seeing we've got a lot of around 15% of our assets that are in the process of needing to be rebuilt or done in the next 15 years.
Yeah, that's what our condition surveys are telling us.
Is it going to be cost effective if we do that in-house instead of using contractors? Part of the problem with contractors is we get a new contractor because he's 10 to the lowest and he's never looked at an environment and issues. But if we have it just like at the beginning of the scheme, everything was done in-house, done really efficiently because they learn from their mistakes and they carry on. So is it quite prudent that we look at keeping this in-house?
So that is a whole other discussion. That's all right if I pause that answer to that question for the next part of the paper. But it's a very good question. What I would say briefly is that section 17A of the Local Government Act requires council to always consider how it delivers its services, consider the different options for delivering those services, whether it's in-house, out-house combination, and make sure that we are doing our best in terms of efficiency and effectiveness for the community. So it is a requirement of council to make sure that we are considering those different models.
So in order to do the strategic change going forward, is that already in your thinking, like you've got ideas already? Because I mean, you've got to keep it simple, stupid, otherwise you're spending big money, depending on how you do this drainage and flood. Stopping.
When you say ideas, you mean solutions in particular, or
think about these things, but you've got to have some brain power to make it happen.
Absolutely.
And I mean, strategic thinking is a gift for not everyone. I'm serious.
So a key tool in our toolbox is something we call the sustainable infrastructure decision-making framework. And so what this is basically looking at is it helps to take stakeholders to a decision-making process through I guess a decision-making process. So looking at, say, if we're looking at a particular part of our scheme, what are the pressures that are coming to bear now and into the future? Ultimately, what are the objectives that we're seeking to achieve in that particular area? So economic objectives, environmental objectives, social objectives. What are the different options to achieve those? how do they stack up from an environmental point of view, from an economic point of view, from a social point of view? And just to reinforce that this is looking at all of those different elements to make sure that we're making good decisions. And then using this process to come up with what is the best process, what is the best option to move forward for the community. So the framework's there. It is early days. We're
consultation part that's given us.
Yeah. Of course, certainly don't underestimate the complexity of that. One area that was reinforced at the Waikato meeting was the importance of those who benefit directly from our infrastructure being a key part of that discussion.
One of the questions here is the amount of money we're going to use, how much of that's going to be used in like the consultation fee, consultation, I guess you've just got half or 60% of it, and the actual project's only going to be 40%. Where, how much is actually being could be used on the project to get and all having a good outcome at a sensible price, not being gobbled up and people and $100,000. How are we going to go forward? How are we going to try and drive those costs out?
So we've got a trial. We're kicking off a trial piece of work this year, and that's going to help us to understand actually what is the size of this job ahead. I guess what we've potentially done in the infrastructure strategy is not saying we're going to entirely switch to a new approach to doing things, but it's slowly making that transition so that we understand the costs that are involved and can start to adapt our programs.
Can you do that in-house?
Budgets. I'd say it'd be a mixture. It sort of depends on the resources in-house that are available, but as I say, it does require some pretty specialist thinking in the space. Community engagement is a really important part of it in terms of helping the community to go through that discussion. We do have some expertise in-house. We can contract another expertise as well to assist us.
We get left behind again.
Thanks, Robert. Hey, look, it's unfortunate this is coming to us on we'll talk about on the 15th of March, and it's going to land on the 2nd of April, which would apply to me. So misunderstanding, we're probably not going to have a lot of impact on what's in there. But that's, I guess, you just got to recognise that's a reality of the process to get these committees in place. Thanks to Adam for sending some stuff around earlier.
But if I could, so a proposal is going out on the 1st or 2nd of April, but it is just a proposal. So there's still a process for consulting, providing feedback, for council to hear submissions and to ultimately make decisions in May, I think. So there is still an opportunity to provide input into this.
Yeah, but one of the things we talked about in forming this committee is to have some opportunity to have some involvement. Because once things go out, there's a stake in the ground to some degree. And if this committee can have some involvement for the stakes in the ground, then that stake might be moved slightly to the left or right. And circumstances meant we have really had that. Well, I don't know, maybe someone's got some great ideas and it can get put in, but I think I see Noel's got a printed copy there. Once you get to that stage, quite often it's not they're not that flexible, but that's by the by. So we got literally read this paper, like the first few pages. Personally, I was quite alarmed. As I read through it, when you get a little bit older, you learn to take a breath and read the whole thing. And yeah, actually, conceptually, it makes a heap of sense. And you know, some of the examples we've seen, like there's 3 floodgates went into one. That's, if we think about what you're saying in that context, it's a bit of a no-brainer. And perhaps if we reflect back on the whole Buckingham process, you know, I was quite surprised at the impacted ratepayers, the specifically impacted ratepayers in that area, weren't piling in saying, let's make this happen yesterday. They're actually quite, you're going to put my rates up and when we're going to get to everything. So what you're talking about here, I think will help with that. But I guess there's a couple of points I would make. Conceptually, it would be great if people like me who started looking at this concept didn't get that initial, bloody hell, everything's going to get left to go to rank and ruin process. And I suspect part of it's just in the way it's framed. And it really concerned me when I read most of council's infrastructure has been in place for a number of decades. In many cases, this infrastructure is nearing the end of its useful life. So immediately is, well, give me some get the facts that tell me what's many, and later on I read actually, many is 15%. If my understanding that 15% is correct. So I would strongly suggest get rid of the word many, because to me, many means more than 50%. For Roger, it might mean more than 75%. For Pip, I don't know, it might only be 15%, but many is way too subjective to have in a word in a document like this, particularly if we're only talking 15%. And this committee is one of the many stakeholders that need to be absolutely involved as we go through it. And I accept that, yes, we will have the opportunity to involve, and we actually really need to be. But we probably need to be grown-ups thinking about the examples that we have seen where this process will work, and not to think, okay, half the Hauraki Plains floodgates are going to be filled in and the pump stations tucked away when they get to the end of the line, because that is what a lot of people will get if it's not phrased.
I guess to add to that too is that it shouldn't just be the reliance to have your say at this key policy type level at the council, at the subcommittee level. And so there's the role there for everyone. There's individual landowners and different committee groups to get involved with that and take your thinking to that. So, to respond to that in part of the consultation process.
Just like to talk on that, Connell, like we had the Environment Commission. Commissioner
for the Environment.
Yeah, he came and spoke to us a month ago.
And if you talk, I have to shoot you.
Oh, true, but okay, what I can say out of that is that highly productive land is important to them, and it needs to be looked after.
It's probably fair to say that his thinking was quite aligned to our thinking.
Yeah.
There were similarities in this, and he's basically directed us to say nothing until he releases his thunder.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to hear that, but I do recall previous parliamentary commissioner had an extraordinarily different point of view.
Yeah.
And while I probably personally quite closely aligned to Simon Upton's thinking, I hope he doesn't get hit by a bus tomorrow, and he will cease in that job at some point.
Yes.
Yeah, the government doesn't have to listen to it.
No.
As well. And thank goodness they didn't listen too much to the last one.
I'd take Ruben's comment there as targeted ratepayers that we put a submission in to the LTP going forward. Like we've got a monthly consultation, so putting in a submission and even filing the same submission around and tailoring it to individual targeted ratepayers that are sitting here and submitting it is important.
From this committee.
No, just even further than that, but at least the people in this committee.
Yeah, individual.
Yeah, me on the big concern for me going forward, there's two. There's the cost of the rate increase, especially on the targeted rate, which I understand that's important. But the bigger picture is that in our area, which is all either floodgated or pumped, is we've got ratepayers that have been there because the system has worked so bloody well, have no idea what the system is. We've also got Central Waikato that travel through our community damn near every weekend in the summer. You'd see them go through in the last 3 days of the fishing contest. You know how many boats get dragged across there. They have no idea that they can't actually get there without that infrastructure. So it's not just a targeted ratepayer, it's a great benefit of the whole Waikato and Wolverton that have benefited from our infrastructure, that flood protection infrastructure, and how they're going to contribute to it so that they can go to their bank and fish or whatever. And how do we educate them that that's there?
They pay 15%.
They may pay it, but they have no knowledge of what it's for or what that infrastructure is.
It's an interesting point you raised, Roger, because I've been thinking on about this since I was elected, in that the community at large requires or is trying to impose on landowners certain standards, requirements, whatever. And New Zealand's only got so much land that we can produce the food that those other parties need to eat. And so I've been promoting, rather than the full cost of targeted rates of the work that we do in land drainage and rivers, is not entirely by the landowner targeted rate payers, and that there should be some community input to the extent of 80-20 type of split. It hasn't found favour amongst the majority yet, but I'm not going to let it go. And so the whole community benefits from the drainage systems in particular, and the rivers, whatever. So it's not just about the landowners, this one, it's a bigger picture. The other issue with, just get back to the issues Collins raised, I strongly supported the infrastructure strategy going out, because we do need to have a mature discussion about what it is that we are doing or need to do. Because to do the same old, many of you have seen that graph that's been around now for a year or two, which shows the exponential growth in the outer years of the 30-year plan, completely unaffordable to maintain the systems that we currently have. Absolutely just not affordable. So we need to be doing things smarter, and some things may be able to remain the same, but we do need to think about change. So that's why I'm seriously promoting this discussion. I don't know what the outcome will be, and I don't have a preconceived idea of what we should be doing, just that we need to talk about it.
I take on it, that's really good. But the other side is, how do we educate? How do we educate great populace of what the value is that they're travelling through? Do you understand what I mean? Like, it says they may get a rate, and they go, I don't know. Like, I get rated to Taupo, everyone here gets rated. Not anymore. Taupo, I don't go that way.
And the hard part is, Roger, I think a lot of councillors sitting around the table at regional council don't understand the flood protection scheme.
No,
and I think it needs to start at that level, so they can then, tell their communities.
Well, so I'll just give you, if there were no stop banks and we had a hiking tide and all the stars lined up like it did on January the 5th, I don't know who was it, 2017, and there was no stop banks, the water would be back to Madaman.
Yep, exactly.
And people go, really? Yes, it would.
Well, they learned about roading, then the bridge wasn't there for a year, 25A. So I don't want to see a flood, inundation.
No.
But that's the sort of message that needs to be put out there. That strengthens my argument, is that it's a community good as opposed to just the landowner issue.
Totally.
I just want to add to that. I've gone and spoken to Shane Jones twice now and Mark Pedersen, and they share your concerns that flood protection is becoming unaffordable, and that that these schemes need extra investment, and for the government's future financial or economic, or where we're going in the next 10 years, agriculture is a huge part of it. So that they know they're going to have to invest. It's just getting everyone around the table and discussing it, and they know that we protect schools, roads, state highways, and all government infrastructure for free. So they understand that. So that, and Greg's speaking to government officials as well, and it's just a big discussion that's going to have to take place in the next couple of years, and it's going to have to be resolved, because we cannot take this load on our own shoulders, and it's got to be shared.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, I'll take an action to send you all a copy of the business case that's been provided to central government. It's called Before the Deluge. It's a national business case. We've put forward 12. Sorry.
Good title.
Yeah. Well, I know it was before. I think it might be beyond the deluge now.
Yeah.
It's done after Hawke's Bay. But that has 12 projects for the Waikato, totaling in the order of 50 million over the next 3 years. And so that's where we're putting our foot forward to the government to say, hey, there's some bigger community benefit here that needs to be acknowledged and supported.
So just following on on that, I've spent quite a bit of time cycling around Hawke's Bay in last year, and the infrastructure we have this side is so superior to everything I've seen in Edgecombe or the It is just, some of their flood protection was piecemeal, was a bit here, but there, but too narrow channels, too low stop banks. And the catchment would be 10 times of what catchment we've got here. Because they're right on the sea and the catchment comes right back as the hills. And I just shook my head, and if you cycle along some of these stop banks, you go, how the hell's this work with 100 mils of rain? It just doesn't. So we're really fortunate that our forefathers had the foresight to what Harris and not to plan such a very good system that we can hear it.
We were lucky that it got built before the RMA. Policies.
I mean, just get back to some of the, just really agree with what we're going to do with the central government, because just to give you guys an understanding, why rate bill's gone up, WE one's gone up, they were 27% last year in comment. So that's the one north. I got over 100 just the rates come through each one. So that's not sustainable. It's a liability. There and going forward, if we don't keep a cap on our people driving our rates, mine's a highly productive bit of peat going forward. My successor planning the farm is a 1,000 cow farm. It may not be farming in 30 or 50 years because of the overrated. We will have to urbanise it. That'll be like, if that won't be food for production, I'll have a couple of donkeys and a llama on, maybe a lot of this. Yeah, and I would see that. But that's, if we have to be aware of the cost of the rates are a serious cost of the farming sector.
And to you there, that from a farming perspective, quite often talk about percentages, but I think if you're talking about educating your public and your urbanites, actually putting a figure on that and putting it out there. I know it might be personal to people and how much rates actually pay, but you know, like yourself is thinking on a 6-figure sum, and a lot of urbanites wouldn't even, they're 26%, whilst that sounds a lot, if it's on $1,000, it's not much. You know what I mean? But if it's on 10,000, so I think actually putting some value on that, actual numbers.
We're going out with dollar figures as opposed to percentages for that reason. Yeah.
You know what? I agree with what you're saying, but it doesn't work like that in council.
I'm not saying council are going to do it,
but
I'm saying from a farming perspective, hence why I did.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't work because we did that in council to understand a catchment one day, and it ended up the catchment was worth, the land in the catchment was worth $56 million, and the other council said they can afford to do it. Don't want it up. So just remember that when you put dollar figures, they go, shit, they've got this much wealth. And it doesn't mean you're making that that's not the income that you're producing off it. That's what the asset is valued at. So, and that doesn't mean you can afford to have 20 or 30% rate increases. So I think you've got to be very careful with what information you want to give out there. It doesn't work.
Also,
yeah,
going for those boat drivers at the moment, I think 90% of the trade industry is gone. 10% market, 80% of the plumbers, builders, their jobs are gone. There's going to be both go next year through. But really, going forward, our costs we've just got to keep a cap on things and understand where it's going.
Yes, through the chair. One of the things I think is the key thing is that model of having the targeted ratepayer bear the burden of cost or something that gives the benefit of New Zealand is one of the key issues. So whether it's through information to the people that enjoy the wealth that comes off it, so that's all of us, in supermarkets and what we enjoy in the country. It's out the 60% of New Zealand's wealth still comes off the land. So it's that sort of education that's required because we all need to, as New Zealanders, need to share in that, not just the farmer on the meter and land behind the stop bank. If we continue to focus our effort on the farmer having to pay for that infrastructure, then it becomes too expensive. So that's
farmers subsidise the urban anyway. And then if you can charge us 60% basically, and you pay 40%. So,
but it's that bigger. It's that bigger question.
Yeah, it's not
how you pay for things. We can't keep expecting
we subsidise the whole country.
Can't keep expecting our farmers to pay for it.
Well, that goes back to that same graph that Greg brought up now and going through. if you just change that from looking at what our infrastructure will look like, if you change that to the costs going forward, that farm rate will be a lot more accelerated around the sheep costs.
Mr. Chairman, just, when I read that article and everyone's alluded to it, that things are just becoming unaffordable long term, and we've got to change something. I don't believe anybody's addressing the elephant in the room, and that's the national policy statement on freshwater management that sets the rules that we abide by through the RMA. And that's where a lot of our cost is coming from. And these are targets that are set that are too aspirational, in my opinion. Everyone has their own opinion, but they're just too aspirational. We want to change the water quality now, not over an extended period. And it's put this huge cost burden on the ratepayer. And it flows through not only to land drainage and flood protection. You just look on the news and all the councils' rates are just climbing hugely, and they're becoming unaffordable. And a lot of that cost is around wastewater management systems. And as the cost of those increases, so does the depreciation cost. So it's a flow-on effect that's affecting every part of this community. So that, to me, is the elephant in the room that we've got to address. So,
sorry, want to answer that one?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I think we've seen in the media in the last few days, I think LGNZ had done a bit of analysis on some of the rating changes across the country and double figures. We're actually, I mean, I think we're going up at 6% as a headline rate, acknowledging that there are some kind of catchment rates involved. But the headline figures for a majority of other councils, you know, in those double figures, driven by exactly the challenges that you mentioned: three waters, infrastructure maintenance, dealing with growth, interest rates. Yeah. Yep.
I actually was a bit cynical the other day because I read something and it talked about, you know, swimmable by whatever, and I'm thinking, well, there's the kids down at Narrawhia swimming in the river, and they're swimming at Wellington Street Beach in Hamilton, and Waikato River's not supposed to be swimmable. So anyway, I'm becoming quite cynical on that issue. So that's my thoughts. I'll shut up.
All right, but there's no other questions on the infrastructure. I'll just reinforce that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just look page 33. There's some dollar figures there, and while it's always great to see, you know, proposed budget being less than what's being spent. Catchment oversight, I'm not quite sure where that comes, but I presume well, your guys' wages would be a part of that. Would it?
Yeah.
But we're looking at a couple $100,000 decrease. So is that savings or is that less happening?
There is some, sorry, I'll try and find the page. There's some reductions that I have taken out that were put in previous LTPs for the uncertainty with the iwi settlement and our investment requirements to develop catchment management plans and things like that. So now that that's a little bit more clear how that's going to be handled, the need for that's been taken out. So that's largely affected those budgets.
So that I know that it's current budget rather than current actuals. So are actuals reasonably close to what the proposed budget is? Is that what I'm hearing you say? Page 33.
I guess I'd like to give a high level comment. So we worked on our budgets. I guess what we're saying is there was some additional costs that were signalled that we were provided for in the previous LTP that we don't believe needed. So those have been removed as savings from the budget.
So we're not looking at decreasing the catchment oversight team by 20% or anything like that.
No.
Those contracted services.
Yeah, contracted services.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's
yeah, and I'd like to give some, so we'll move on to the second part, which is around our budgeting. So this is from page 31 onwards. So we go through a budgeting process, like we do this every year, but certainly a much more in-depth analysis every 3 years. And we look at how we allocate our labour resource across our different schemes. It's a little bit simpler in Hauraki compared to the Lower Waikato, for example, because of the different compartments and the different way that the budget's chopped up in that particular area. But we look at, where is our time actually going, and making sure that the time that aligns to where our budgeting is, because scheme needs to change over time. And also looking where our cash costs are going as well, particularly contracted services, materials, but some of those fixed costs as well that we really can't, we just have to live with, things like interests, electricity rates, depreciation, etc. So that all gets taken into account. In general terms, what we're looking at is across ICM, or across flood protection and drainage, our staffing is static. So we're not introducing any new roles into our flood protection or land drainage teams, but we do have some realignment of where that resource is going. So that drives some changes, some ups and downs, and it also drives changes in overhead costs that come off that, because every hour of labour brings with it a certain degree of management costs. There are some, just in paragraph 16, identified a couple of areas of increased contracted services and materials that have been identified. So that's basically the costs to deliver work on the ground. So I've noted there, work around scheme reviews, the fact that I think we will probably know that our herbicides have gone up ridiculously in the last few years. So we've got to accommodate that. There were some really, and this is sort of speaking to your point, Roger, some really interesting proposals were put forward around how we do our work as a council, looking at how we currently deliver it, whether it's through internal resource or external resource, and whether or not it would make sense to us to consider something different. As I said, this is all under the guise of Local Government Act. We do need to always consider how we deliver those services. Those proposals haven't been included in the long-term plan because there's some additional work that's been identified, just to make sure that, I guess we want to make sure that if we do look to change our operating model, that it is the right decision to make, and it is for the benefit of council and the benefit of our community. But some of the areas were around construction. You mentioned construction, not necessarily the big jobs, but some of those more moderate sized jobs that we do. But there are other areas where we do use a lot of contracted services, so planning, for example, surveying would be another one. So there are a few areas that we need to look at as a directorate to make sure that we're delivering the services as best as we can. But at this stage, those are outside of this particular proposal. So yeah, as I said, Connell, there's a summary of the budgeting where it stands on page 33 across our different areas.
And on the actuals are on 25. Compared against for this year's budget.
And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to leave it that as far as our budgeting. But it's a bit of an adjustment we do every 3 years just to make sure that our resources are going where they need to go to maintain the schemes.
Any questions?
Just do you do, like, when you do a project, an in-house project, do you actually do a review at the end of it?
We do.
Because at the Waitaka pump station, there's been a long reach digger and another digger sitting there for the last 3 months. Being a farmer, you're always concerned about the equipment that sits around. Does it have a standing charge?
Good question.
I can't say determinately, but I would say not. I wouldn't think
So the
that
contractor sucks it up. He just sits the gear there, $300,000 or $400,000 machine. It just sits there and it only gets charged for the hours that it gets used, whether it's used 1 day a week or 3 days a week.
Yeah, I mean, that's our general agreement with them. I imagine if it was sitting there, maybe they didn't have an alternative use. We didn't have anything sitting on standby there, but I wasn't aware of that, so I'll look into it and I can more definitive answer, but you're not aware of any standby situation that we would have had.
I just wondered whether you sat back and just did a review and thought, well, maybe we could have done this more efficiently and done it for those 2 weeks.
Yeah, a lot of the challenges with that one in particular were we needed the water levels to come down enough so that we could actually do the works. But yes, we do a lessons learned and look at the projects when we finish them.
And just another thing going forward, I know from basically Malcora Road north, the Kaiheri Road, all the banks are under modelling and review. Can we have a little bit more clarification on what's actually first emergency ponding zone and second emergency ponding zone? Because I have local input that says north of the Waikaka Bank always tops over first before the Maukura line bank. And that could be a contentious place for landowners, but I don't want my farm going under, but if we're going to model it so that everybody goes under at the same time, then there's going to be quite a big cost to get those banks to that state.
Yeah, so that's what we're bringing it back to, is that original concept. And from my understanding is that it depends on where the rain falls and how the river is reacting as to where it actually tops. But when we have the output from the model, that's my intent, is to have something that's quite understandable. And we'll communicate that when we've got it. So I'll make note of that as well.
In 2017, well, I was sort of ended up with a confluence of all the water coming basically at Maukura Landing, and we overtop, but I hope strongly that we don't have district councils meddling with our scheme anymore because of weirs that weren't managed and flood zones that don't work properly. So, yeah, just in the long-term plan, that's why I asked whether maybe north of the Waikaka has to be a ponding zone, because that's just to accommodate the extra water. Something that maybe regional district or government don't want to hear is that maybe putting some cattle back in the ABC flax block to actually take some vegetation down for a limited period using something like halter to manage the stock is actually a viable option, so the water does flow rather than come down to Maukura Road. Oh, we can't get through all this vegetation, just goes over the banks. So the targeted ratepayer, the modelling says that these banks will have to go up another 300 to handle this. So I'm just thinking there could be easier options.
And that's part of the refinement of the model that we have paused, that we really want to understand we're getting it right. And the vegetation management in that particular area is one of the things that we're looking at. Yeah.
Because the original scheme, as a child, I actually saw cattle go in and out. And it was only through the summer months. But yeah, this fresh water record and all the rest of it, I think will must prevent that. So that means now that you have to do it mechanically or chemically. And that's all the cost. Just for a sideline, buy 100 odd Angus head. When you sell them, the rates, the money goes back to council. And they've done the job, and you've cut your costs down. But yeah, to sell that to government will be very difficult.
I think there is a capital project identified for the emergency funding zones. Now long-term plan. And it's on our list for, I mentioned we're seeking government support for that program. It's on that list as well.
And that's why I've always asked the question at every meeting, we need rules and regulations about what I call the Willow Zone, which is our emergency ponding zone. And that's one of those forgotten issues that doesn't ever crop up, but maybe once in 10 years we need it, and we need it badly. And the other thing I'd like to make a note is that when we do recontour banks, we actually take the time to remove the topsoil, recontour the bank and put the topsoil back so we can actually grow some grass on it, rather than just digging a whole lot of clay.
Yes, thanks for mentioning that. And it depends on the bank and where we've gotten the material from. So in the Waikato side, a lot of their material is sourced from quarry or in clay, but on the Hauraki side, we're very lucky that we sourced material from the maintenance of the drains and canals, as well as the foreshore material, and that silt sediment is really rich in nutrients. So what my understanding is that we don't topsoil generally because it is able to strike. Yes.
I've focused on the operational budget. Just note that obviously we do plan our capital work as well as part of the long-term plan. And probably the best reference for yourselves there is in the infrastructure strategy. So there's a summary of our forecast capital expenditure broken down to different areas. And there's a bit of a summary on page 70 of your agenda, which shows the different types of expenditure, but also a bit of a breakdown for our Hauraki catchments as well. There's no other.
Yeah, just on page 35, sort of halfway down, it talks about the long-term plan. It says significant changes have occurred in the operating context since the 21-31 business case was written, and as such, it's appropriate as part of this to review and update. What are the significant changes?
That's under the understanding and adapting to natural
Yes, there's a couple of bullet points, and it's 2 paragraphs below that.
Yeah, so I'll come to that.
Okay.
So the next part I want to talk about, there's no other questions about the operational capital.
Oh, sorry, just for you.
Move forward to. So basically there are a number of areas of additional investment that we've identified in the long-term plan. And I've noted ones that I thought were particularly relevant to yourselves, the flood protection, land drainage activity. Jumping to that one, so that is our understanding and adapting to natural hazard risk. What we've seen is that, so this is the work that our regional resilience team does. The Hauraki project is one example, the East Coast project is another example. Our regional resilience team do a lot of work with district councils, communities, to help to work through what's happening in the environment, what kind of key decisions are coming up around things like land use change, land use management, and actually how is the best that the community responds to these, particularly where there's a bit of an uncertain future around the impacts of climate change. So what we've seen is a lot higher demand for that work, which has stretched the team a lot. But also what we have seen over the last couple of years, especially, is a much greater need to focus on our infrastructure challenges as well. So for what I've talked about around Hauraki, around Thames Coast, it's not really a focus on our main scheme areas, because we need to have those conversations, what I said, as part of the infrastructure strategy, as within our scheme areas. So that's what's changed for that particular program. What we've also found is that in 2021, the program put quite a significant amount of expenditure, I think in the order of $500,000 a year. What we've found is that actually it takes additional resources to actually undertake that work that's required. So it's not just good enough to have the financial capability there, you have to have the human capability as well. And so with this particular business case, it's actually holding the line what was agreed to in 2021. But instead of the $500,000 additional expenditure being entirely cash to go towards projects, we're going to use that to partially fund an additional person to work with district councils, work with our community to get this work done.
So is that what you're talking about? Like the page further down, there's 2 new roles.
Page
In this case, we increased 486,000 over 2 years in 2 fixed term positions.
Page you on, sorry,
the next page.
Page 36. No, that's a different one, so I'll get onto that one shortly. So that's around our strategic spatial focus. So
thanks for your explanation, Greg, but to be honest, I didn't quite understand.
Okay.
So you've got these other things like extraordinary things that are happening. So can you break it down a bit more simply?
So we put in 2021, we put forward a business case to council some additional investment in resilience so that our teams could work with the community, to work with district councils to help them work through adaptation plans.
Yeah.
What we've found over the last 3 years in implementing that plan is that there's much higher demand from the teams. The team's getting spread thinner, but also it is a challenge to implement the program based on the human resource that we have.
So that's the
yeah.
That's the significant change that's occurred in the operating context.
Yes. Okay. So what we need to do is rebalance that in terms of cash versus human resource. And so we're introducing one new role into our regional resilience team.
Thank you.
And so that's covered on page 35. If I just take a step back on page 34, just the proposal there, which is a fixed term proposal over a couple of years to review how we fund our critical infrastructure. This is focused, and sorry, I'll just reinforce, I've got Mike Scarsbrook online. He is our manager of science, and he's involved quite intimately in a number of this project, so he'll help me with introducing these concepts, whether there are any particular questions around these proposals. This particular one around critical infrastructure is looking at what we currently do, because we do fund our infrastructure in different ways, looking at what happens around the country, because there are different ways that councils do effectively the same work. Looking at what our challenges are. We've talked about the fact that our schemes do provide that broader benefit from the point of view of state highways, schools and other infrastructure. And the aim of this particular piece of work, which is funded through council surplus from prior years, is to identify actually how should we be approaching the funding of our critical infrastructure and what changes should we consider to prepare us for the next long-term plan. So it's a relatively small piece of work. It's not necessarily changing the funding. Yeah, actually, what do we need to consider if we are going to look at changing things? It does speak to the affordability challenge that's come up a number of times around this table, and looking at actually what can we do differently to help make things affordable for our ratepayers. No, Mike, was there anything else you wanted to add on that particular proposal?
Just that, and I think you've already said it, Greg, is that as our emphasis on some of these schemes changes, so if we take a greater or put a greater emphasis on environmental outcomes or cultural outcomes, social outcomes, that I think the mix of beneficiaries changes. And I guess part of that work that Blair Keenan, our principal economist, is going to be doing is looking at, how do we change in future that funding? So it's a research project, as Greg said. It's not sort of changing things here and now, but it's getting us to understand what are our future options. So if the community wants us to shift where we invest and how we invest in this critical infrastructure, it's about understanding, well, who are the beneficiaries and how might those funding models change?
Thanks, Mike. Through Mr. Chair, I'll keep running through these. I think we've not got any questions. So the next one to cover off is the strategic spatial focus. So again, Mike's involved in that one, and I guess it speaks to several of the comments that have already occurred in the meeting today around needing to get on top of land use change, needing to understand what the impacts will be, and needing to be a bit more strategic about how we're planning it, looking to balance outcomes, talk about protection of high quality soils. Mike, did you have any particular high points on this one?
Just to reiterate the development work we've done on the sustainable infrastructure decision making framework, which you mentioned earlier, Greg, and which is sort of undergoing trial work. The sort of precursor, or the Hauraki committee in the last triennium, we presented the draft CITIF to the committee. I think that's again part of that whole picture is, and if we look out long term, what does the Hauraki Plains look like? And as a regional council, we need to sort of apply that spatial strategic lens to things. How are we seeing things change over time? How is climate change and climate adaptation going to affect the sorts of land uses that are going to be appropriate in certain areas? So yeah, it's quite an important piece of work for the region to try and identify where and how land use might change and where the appropriate land uses are in different parts of the region. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Mike. That's a really important conversation, because however we use the land influences how we fund what we do in the community, including our infrastructure. So we need to make sure that the two work together. Sustainable peatlands. So this is a bit of an extension to work that's already underway. It'll be of interest to you all, no doubt. A lot of peat on the Hauraki Plains. So it's a.
Sorry, just keeping on what Mike just talked about. Can you sort of elaborate a bit on these two new positions? that are going to take a strategic spatial approach and allow us to make better informed decisions. So what do they, there's a whole lot of words there. What do they mean?
I'll pass that one to Mike.
I'm not sure. I think there was Connell, was it, asking? I'm not sure if I can answer that in detail. My understanding is that they sit within our policy and implementation team to essentially lead that work around the spatial planning. It's obviously you'll be aware of the Spatial Planning Act and the fact that that's now sort of been taken off the table, but it doesn't change the fact that as a region we've got these major issues coming up, climate change, changing land use. So yeah, sorry, I can't answer that in detail exactly where those people will sit and what they're doing.
But there is a description there, kind of, you said, in terms of a lead role for this, to lead this work over the next 2 years.
Yeah, and I guess the jargon really brings the alarm bells. You know, what are these people? I'm guessing it's probably logical, but I'm listening to rate increases, and I'm guessing this is not targeted rates money. Targeted
This is funded through prior year surplus, so it won't have an impact on rate.
Funded through what?
Prior year surplus.
Yeah, it'll be charged.
Yeah, that's good. So I'd rather have the money back and some work done that doesn't need to be done, but I'm guessing this work needs to be done, but is this effectively a cost to comply with national legislation?
It's a cost to get ourselves ready for the spatial planning that we need to do, which is what we need to do to respond to the issues that we'll talk about today. I'm getting ahead of actually what does our land use look like going into the future.
So I guess it won't be fun, but sort of grumbling acceptance that money needs to be spent, but wouldn't it be nice if it didn't have to?
I didn't bring it with me, Connell, but there's a 720-page report written to the council meeting in late January, early February, when we did the long-term plan. The business case that supports that is in there. And I'm not saying that go find it, but it was a lot of reading and it was supported by the council. So
yeah, that's good. But it's just
we can find
when you've got to read something 2 or 3 times to figure out what it says, something's wrong.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, and last of all, we've got sustainable peatlands. So it said it's a piece of work that's already underway. It was committed to council in the 2021 long-term plan. Mike, again.
Yeah, I just I guess preface this by saying, if in terms of the science that we do in the regional council, the science section is there to undertake research into emerging issues and provide evidence that will help future decision making. And the work on peat, which has developed over the last few years, as Greg said, is really in response to this emerging issue, not only from a greenhouse gas emission perspective, but also an environmental perspective and a infrastructure sustainability perspective around the subsidence of peat, the oxidation of peat, and how we as a region are going to address that. So we've got 65,000 hectares of drained peat in the region, and much of that is in the Hauraki plains, as you all know, and we're facing increasing issues around subsidence and changing how the drainage system works with that subsidence, not to mention, you know, impacts on roading infrastructure and other things. So one of the things that we've been working on for the last 3 years is understanding that that peat subsidence issue across the whole of the region, putting in place monitoring programs to measure peat subsidence, and also understanding things like how the peat surface oscillation, so how things change on a yearly cycle. What the research is moving into, and Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research is a key partner here, as is the University of Waikato, is looking to understand some of the options we have for slowing the subsidence rate of peat. You know, what are the things we could do in future to to slow down that rate of subsidence. There's increasing talk and pressure around, I guess, policy responses to peat subsidence, and that will inevitably come in the future. But what we want to do is make sure we've got some good, robust evidence, and particularly some ideas around options that landowners could take when it comes to managing peat better in the future. As a region, it's a major issue, but also, as I say, we're getting pressure sort of nationally and internationally around managing peat soils, which I'm sure you're all aware of.
I guess I think really important practical element to this project as well, in terms of working with those who farm the land. And also, obviously, we've got a large crew of folk who have a lot of experience working on peat, managing our drainage networks. So actually understanding practically what we're seeing and what some of those practical solutions might be going forward.
Yeah, as a councillor sitting here with lobbying on this, there's an elephant in the room in terms of peat soils. In the last year, regional council has been studying the climate impacts of peat, and they came to a conclusion that 11% of Waikato's climate change emissions come from peat, and that 7% nationally comes from peat. So basically, that's Waikato and Southland. So what they're doing here is they're doing another 5-year project through to 2029 to look at studying exactly what that is. But there don't seem to be very many solutions other than tree planting. The one they're talking about is dewatering, which effectively means watering over peat. My concern is that this information about the amount of climate change emissions coming from peat is recent knowledge, and then the farming community needs to be aware of it, particularly because when this research is finished in 2029, 2030 with Landcare research, in 2030, our climate change agreement leads us to pay between $3 billion to $20 billion via overseas credits, which we haven't met our agreements that James Shaw agreed to in 2021. So we're coming pressure on suddenly to say, where's this coming from? What can we do about it? And I think the farming community needs to be aware now, not wait for 5 years' time to realise this. And I'd like to draw your attention and get circulated a report of the Climate Change Committee, which I'm part, on nature positive carbon neutral framework phase 8, which basically was talking about the regional council is very focused on climate change issues for itself. So they're doing solar panels, electric vehicles, etc., and they monitor that continuously. That's about this much. When they add in public transport, it becomes this much. When they add in the amount of peat soil related climate change impacts that we are technically responsible for drainage, it's up to the roof. So there's a very large component, it's all set out in this report, it's a very large component of dealing with climate change is sitting here in this. And so I'd like you guys to be aware of this report, see a copy of it. And I'd also draw your attention to a story in New Zealand, Radio New Zealand, 1st of January, from a professor at Waikato University, talking about how the new government is also looking at starting to implement peat soils, which are the soils which are technically outside climate issues at the moment, bringing them in. So it's just something to be really aware of and to raise with your people because it's starting to come through for us. And I'd like to see both those reports going forward now. Any comments, Noel or Robert?
Yeah, I can tell you what my thoughts were. Robbie and I had been attending another meeting and we decided to walk into the Climate Change Committee to see what they were actually doing. And to hear the speaker basically saying, you got to plant your way out of this because there's no other way. And I told them that you can't plant your way out of it. But my personal observation is that the council is dealing with some of these issues in isolation. For the matters to be raised that if it were saying so much CO2 is coming from the drainage network in the peat soils and the likes, and putting a negative spin on the farming use of peat. And that was my perception of what was going on. Without Robbie and I being aware of the report, that's probably our fault more than anything for not reading the other committee's reports. But we're working in silos, and you know, like the committee that Robbie chairs and I'm deputy of is integrated catchment management, and integrated to me is still a word that is not really understood. You know, it means across everything. It's not an isolation. So there's a lot of work to do. So I appreciate you bringing it up, Ben. And you can tell I'm a bit grumpy about the fact that we are not working on the same page all the time. Thank you. I don't know, you might be more complimentary.
Ben, can I just ask a question? Has anyone on the climate change committee read For Pete's Sake?
It's actually been recommended that we recirculate. Well, this one that my son was talking about is a 5-year project to look at what you could possibly do. So from what I gather, Pete's Sake actually is a document that tells you what you can do now. But we're going to study it for 5 years. So
it hasn't been read?
It's been circulated to us, yes.
Thank you.
My comment, yes, I believe similar to Noel that some committees are in isolation, and I have I've brought this up in council. This committee is not a committee of policy. We don't decide. Policy is given to us, and we've got to deal with policy. Climate change puts when you're sitting in climate change, someone will come and put a paper through, and you have a discussion about it, and then it becomes strategy. Before we know it, as councillors, that strategy becomes policy, and that then affects this committee in a huge way of cost and implementation of that strategy. And it's happening all the time. That is my issue with what goes on in some of those committees of isolation. And I'm not putting any of the members down that are on those committees, because they're only getting the information that they're putting in front of them. But it's sad that myself and Noel don't get, and other committee members don't get to voice our opinion of how we think that will affect our committees and council a lot more. And I've been struggling with that for the last 9 months, where I've said to other councillors, if you go ahead with this, this will happen. And they go, oh, bullshit. And now they're sitting there and going, oh, it is happening. And I totally agree with you. And it's disheartening, and at times you think, what am I doing here? And why am I fighting this battle? But without the members here helping me, saying, no, we're not going to accept some of these things, we will be in isolation still fighting against it. So that's where we need you guys to voice up and go, no, we won't accept that, and we can't accept those costs. If you believe that's what you want to say, I wholeheartedly support you, but yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
I just wanted to say, I think this is a national issue. It's
definitely.
But it's something that Federated Farmers needs to be aware of, because it's recently arrived as a new issue. And so we need to all be aware of it.
One thing I've got issue with that peat thing, and it's more than anything else, we can spend all this money, and I think me and Noel are in support of this, that it's great having, what they're trying to accomplish or whatever, but they should actually be, instead of worrying about, it should be about alternative land use that we can still keep farming, but maybe we shouldn't be dairying on it or mazing it or whatever. Maybe it should all be in blueberries, or it should be in kiwi fruit, or whatever it is. But that's not the outcome you're going to get from that report.
Yeah, but peat's been giving away CO2 since millennium.
Yep.
It hasn't changed.
No.
And we need to have CO2 in the air.
Yep. Because they don't know no one's got the baseline, but all they're going to do is what the emitter is. And if you exactly. Yep.
It pisses me off on the science point.
Yep. I agree. But anyway, we've got it. It's the cards we've dealt with at the moment, and we just got to play the cards.
I don't think any further on that.
Just,
Yeah.
the encouraging thing I read in this article is that you're not spot on, but it says it'll be fact-based and science.
Yep.
That's fantastic. In the next article, just down on page, it says to encourage regenerative farming, and there's no science behind regenerative farming. So why have we got the two there, and then we're fact-based, which I totally support, and it's just what you were saying, Peter, you know, and then regenerative farming doesn't have science to back it. I mean, there's organics.
They are looking at it because they're saying it needs to be going forward, so it's still getting one.
That's right, but the term that it's known as not changing is totally different. So what I'm saying,
It's how you interpret.
It is in the consultative document on the LTP, so I encourage everyone to look at the that consultative document, because there's one or two surprises in there that I don't know whether I want to get your blood boiling right now, but I encourage you to look at it, and there will be an opportunity in the submission or feedback form to comment on other matters that we're not seeking to reach feedback on. But it is here on page 24 in this draft, which I think is just about final. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so that's what I want to cover off. I guess just emphasise that this will be released for public consultation first week of April, be open for a month, and then council goes through its decision-making process in terms of hearing submissions and making a decision ultimately to agree on something that will be finally signed off end of June for the financial year. I want to make a comment about committee involvement, because there is obviously there's a few areas that you have an interest in. There's an opportunity to provide that feedback to help council to consider these various issues and make a final decision on the long-term plan.
I think it would be a good idea to share that page, Noel, that you just for the committee.
For Pete's sake.
Yeah. That'd be a good idea or not?
I think we should.
Not officially released yet.
As an it's not officially released.
It
will be on the council webpage from the 2nd of April.
Okay.
So whether it's an action that on the 2nd of April, the link is sent out to all the committee members. That would be the.
Yeah.
Yeah, and make sure you read the bit on the increased permitted activity targeted rate from $75 to $376. I wasn't going to mention that.
You know, it's next one either. Okay. That's it. Okay. All right. Okay. So was it Ruth now?
So that we on the 2nd of April, that the democracy sends out the link to the consultation document to the committee. And I'd say go to both committees.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that means the subcommittee members can send that on to their network as well.
And also that the Climate Action Committee.
What's the document number on the bottom there? What is there a document number?
Document number 28414. According to February 2024.
That's going to be statement.
Yeah, exactly. That's the last agenda on the last Climate Action Committee. He might still with us.
No, it was my turn.
That's the end of my paper, thanks.
And it to both Hauraki and Waikato members. Cool. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just before we finish up, I've just raised a really important point that on page 47, we've got a document that's reasonably sound. And then there's this graphic and point around regenerative farming being not defined is absolutely true and quite concerning. Phrases like that and that don't have a meaning. And there's probably another couple of terms around there that are pretty vague as well. I just suggest that the committee might want to express some concern around that sort of terminology that's just not, it's ambiguous, it's not appropriate, like we promote responsible farming. I guess that's not necessarily defined, but it's probably a hell of a lot more clearly defined than regenerative farming.
Go back to you, this is part of the infrastructure strategy, isn't it?
What page are you on, sorry?
So,
Yeah, so what I suggest is,
that's a submission.
this is a submission. Yeah, absolutely.
Submission panel.
Yep.
Because that's the infrastructure strategy is part of the consultation document. And so you put that feedback through in a submission. Yeah.
Or perhaps everyone might want to make a note that that's the sort of thing that can be read by different people in extraordinarily different ways. It can lead to unpredictable outcomes. What you don't want these documents to be.
I think what's happening with farming, it's been dictated to by consumers overseas that's coming through, people like Nestle, and they are dictating to New Zealand dairy farmers through the dairy companies already what they expect up to the year 2050. So, I mean, I think you talk about silos. You need to be looking at what other people are doing, like dairy companies, perhaps bring it into a conversation, which you just about policy. But don't make the policy, all you're doing is restating what they've done. Because, I mean, they're more valuable than you guys in terms of keeping the country going. But you have to work with them. And I think it's so important, like what Noel was saying, do not do things in a silo. Universities do that.
Just before you go ahead, the other thing that is useful and relevant is a link to the New Zealand story on the 31st of January 2024. It sets out a lot of the context that's wider. I think that's useful to add into 7200.
I don't know if we should be putting other people's information up there. That's just our stuff.
It's a good thing, though. Yeah, that's worthwhile.
You could email the group yourself. That'd be safer. I think. Thank you.
That's a good idea. And I appreciate it.
That's on the minutes. Cause the reference to a New Zealand story on the 31st of January.
Why don't you do that?
Privately, just everyone's email, just do send them the link. Yeah, thank you.
And then the climate action report should go out now, not wait.
Yep.
You can everyone.
Where information and resolution on the board is that the committee will receive the long-term plan report. The first action point is that Greg is going to provide the business case to the committee as discussed on the 2nd of April. I will send you the long-term planning consultation document for you to put in your submission. And I will also, after the meeting, circulate the climate action report that was discussed by Councillor Dunbusser. So I have a mover and second.
And then move on to
Texture.
oh, sorry. Can I all in favour? Sorry. Against. Thank you. Harry.
Just going to move to our last item, Mr. Chairman, and just an overview of the Piaka River Ngāti Town Left Top Bank project, sort of a bit of a lesson learned. We just sort of be of interest to the committee, given that the Piaka River scheme is a substantial investment and protects quite a, I guess, large area of North Hauraki Plains, but also Ngāti. So I'll hand over to Brady.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Sorry for adding more pages to your agenda pack. I know it's an extra reading, but we've already kind of postponed putting some of this out, so I didn't want to delay it anymore. This work was completed over a couple of years while we did the Natia Stop Bank upgrade that had received some shovel-ready MBIE funding. And the important part for this work is given us some key knowledge to understanding how the soils are behaving underneath our stop banks and how the river is affecting how they stand up. And this is driven off the back of kind of a couple of failures that we've had over the years. And a very strong desire on our part to not want to replicate that and cause them. So the guts of the report is in your pack, but there's a presentation here as well that I just like to run through. And I just want to acknowledge our contract engineer, Grant Offleston, who was the real driver behind the smarts of this project and has prepared this content. So he wasn't able to be here today, but I'm speaking on behalf. So if you have any more technical questions or want to know any more about some specifics, I'm happy to pass and connect you to discuss that. So we'll run through the presentation. Thanks, Leah. So this section of Stop Bank was Paul's Wharf to Natia Town. So for those of you familiar with Natia, it's along River Road on the eastern side of the town. And in 2018, we had some king tides and some rain immediately following some construction work that happened on this piece of bank, and the stop bank failed significantly in three areas. So it failed along a length of 224 meters, and we completely lost 50 meters length of stop bank into the river. It just disappeared overnight. So the special thing about some of the Piapa River stop banks is that they're very close to the river. And it has the river in some cases is very deep because of some of the engineering and modification works that were carried out when the scheme was developed over the years. And because of the nature of the soils in those areas, the foundation of these stop banks are very sensitive and essentially very weak if you handle them incorrectly. So we have a quite unique situation in our area of the region that is important for people to understand. So next slide, thanks. So when the stop banks failed, which was the cracking in part that you saw in the last picture, there was a lot of emergency works that were undertaken. We spent about $1 million at the time to get sheet piling in and under some very stressful conditions to try and protect the town of Natia, because in this particular area, there is the stop bank, the river, the stop bank, the road, and then houses in very close proximity. So this is just it's a picture of them driving the sheet piling in several years ago when the failures occurred. Next slide, thanks. So we still need to upgrade this stop bank, and we were lucky enough to receive some of the additional funding to allow us to do some extra monitoring while we did the upgrade. So the overall objectives of the project were to upgrade the stop bank, but also to understand what was going on so that we could avoid any failures in the future, and develop a methodology that would work, that we could implement so that it reduced our risk of failures. The project also includes the removal of 2 existing floodgates, and that was completed in 2021. So next slide, please. So like I said, identify we needed to identify the likely causes of the failure, what caused it to slump and crack, as well as develop a methodology that would allow us to successfully upgrade it, and then test that methodology, and then implement what we found out along the rest of the length. Next slide, thanks. So there's a bit of detail around there about how we went about the investigation, but it's essentially put in a variety of measuring devices that measured geotechnical aspects on how the soil was behaving with pressures and moisture contents and things like that to determine how they were changing as we piled material on top. And so what we did is we put all of the monitoring devices out, and then we started raising a 50-meter section of the stop bank in slow lifts, waiting, seeing how that changed, doing another one, waiting, see how that changed, and do another one to see kind of how far we could push it, I suppose. So yeah, next slide, please. So what we found from the investigation portion of it, with how the Natia section failed, was that there's some very weak areas of the river side of the stop bank. And when it's put under stress or conditions change too fast, then it can fail. So when conditions change, I mean, we can add that failure caused by upgrading it really quickly. So adding a meter of material on top and adding a lot of weight, and over how far we spread that. So one thing that we also looked at that was a cause of the failure is the upgrade that we did in 2018. When it failed, there was upgrade both on the landward side and the river side. And as you can imagine, the river side is in constant contact with the water, and so is a more saturated and is in a different state than on the landward side. Particularly in certain places where we aren't compacting that. There's a aspect to the stop banks that you can't see with your eye. It's not the nice pyramid shape. There's actually a need for material to be on either side to kind of anchor stop banks in, if you will. And affecting some of that material is what kind of caused the failures until 2018. So next slide, please. So when we did the trial upgrade, we've only upgraded or put material on the landward side. We've stayed completely away from the river side of the stop bank. And we trialed a 50-meter section, as I said, and we built it up to actually a little bit higher than what we needed to see how far we could go. The key things were that we've used river sediment rather than quarry fill. So the weights and the nature of the material is lighter and it's consistent rather than mixing them together. And as I said, we've focused on doing the land side only. So while we did the trial, the monitors that we had in place showed us that the pressures that may build up and cause failure kind of built up, but not to the threshold that we knew would trigger a failure or trigger a slump. So the trial was quite successful, which was really good. Next slide, please. The other interesting thing that we noticed, because we had these monitors in reading 24 hours a day, and they were reading not only the kind of pressures in the soil, but also some of the positioning and we noticed that the flow of the river, which in this location is tidally influenced, so it goes up and down every day with the tide. The material under the stop bank and the stop bank itself doesn't stay the same all day. It moves slightly in and out when the tide comes, which was very interesting. And so you can see up there, it moved up to 180 mils with the tide, which is fairly significant. Horizontal. Yeah. Sorry, it's yeah. So this was due to the tide, sorry. Kind of, if you, I think about it a little bit as it's breathing.
Yeah.
When the tide comes in, it kind of takes a breath, and then when it goes out again, it relieves the pressure and it relaxes a little bit more.
So it's elastic fluid.
Yes, to a point.
That's an issue, that the remolded shear strength is less than original. So after it's been under pressure and releases, it hasn't got the same strength that it used to have.
Ship roll. Ship into the middle.
No, the wet foundation material that's below water level, below sea level.
So when we did see, as we were topping it up, that there was a certain level of vertical sediment as well as we placed that weight on top. And that's more than what we would see in a more traditional kind of clay foundation situation. And that's, we did expect that, as you would expect with the weaker soils.
We go back now, because we know that the land behind is consistent with the weight as well, but around it isn't so much. As it does settle down. Why is it compared to what it was when 3 years ago?
Yeah, so it will settle more rapidly than on clay, but it's only been a short period of time. So we know that for, I don't want to misquote here, but for stop banks on these type of soils, it's more of a 20-year look at than more, but you can't, the risk of trying to preempt that and put more on top, because you know it's going to settle it, the weight actually accelerates the sinking, so you know better.
Sustaining material is what we do in bush lines, but every year you're going to review it, it's the land behind sinking with the weight as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's.
And this has always been the case in this area. It's not changed. We're just understanding it a bit better. So next slide, please. So we successfully, using the methodology of putting a small lift down and putting a small lift down rather than working in kind of small sections, and putting a lot on at a time, we successfully upgraded the remainder of the stop bank. But what we've come out the back end with is a new kind of risk assessment that we need to use when we're doing these particular stop bank upgrades, and the new methodology of how we're going to understand whether we're putting the stop banks under too much pressure. So the recommendations from the project to us as a council are to adopt this new construction methodology as a requirement for these types of stop banks. And also to, I didn't mention it, it's in the paper, but we used a modeling tool that they developed in Japan under similar soil conditions to predict with certain, pressures and moistures that would predict if the bank would fail or not. And we used that during the upgrade to see how far we were pushing it. So the recommendation is that we continue to use this type of tool when we're doing upgrades of this nature in the future. And there's a bit more understanding that needs to go on around the stop bank movement. Is it happening how much is it happening? In, you know, how far up the river reach is it happening? And what is it, how does it change in the event of a flood event? Are we putting ourselves in a higher risk position? And with the, as you alluded to before, as it's continuing to move every day, are the soils getting weaker and weaker with each movement, as you would bend a piece of metal until it broke, basically. So there's a few more things that we'd like to continue investigating as we do the next set of stop bank upgrades. But the information that we've gotten from this trial has been really invaluable, and we've shared it with Hauraki District to assist with some of the stop banks that they are upgrading as well. Next slide, I think that might be, yeah, just kind of gone through some of that. Yeah, I think that's the last slide of that one. Yeah. So I'll take any relatively basic questions. If you have any highly engineering or want to see, you know, the model or the tool or anything like that, then we'll have to take that offline. But thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to thank Jody for that. At Hauraki, we have benefited greatly from this work that's been done. And Jody and her staff have shared this information with us, which has been very useful. Right now, we've let a contract in Kuro stop bank lift, which is Canal West Road going upstream from Waitakere School. And using this this report, we've had a look at that context to understand whether the stop bank on the canal is a high risk, and identified that there are differences with the depths of Piako River versus the depths of the Doug Canal. And but despite that, we've had a close look at the methodology recommended, and therefore we are adopting that conservative methodology in terms of low lift and long construction stages, rather than lifting a lot at a time. So thank you, Joe.
Yeah, Jody, I've just got a comment. Thanks very much for bringing this to committee. It's pretty useful. It was a dramatic time when it really came to light. And it's really good information. Just a question, I don't know if you know the answer or not, but we were out there at one stage and all the piles had been driven in and stuff truck behind for the silt build up. And as it's turned out, there's more information available. Was that of any assistance to the whole process, or just a good thing to do?
Do you mean when the sheet piles were put in initially?
There was wooden piles driven into the river itself, and they were trying to extend the berm out into the river.
Yes, because it provides the stability for the foundation on the river side where it's weaker. What we're looking into at the moment is what are the effects of driving those hard structures in on the flow of the river, and does it cause some deflection and undesirable erosion somewhere further down because we've accidentally changed or accelerated some parts of the river. So that's my next, you've got someone having a little look at what work we've done and doing some assessment at the moment. But that's and we'll have some projects starting in the next couple of years to rebuild some of those berms along the Piako that have deteriorated and are really starting to eat away because the significance of The riverside berm is, we've been told is up to 15 meters out into the river to allow that bank to be stable enough. So it's not a small chunk of the stuffing. And the hard part is that you can't really see it. And people think that it's part of the river when actually it's a necessary part of the asset.
Yeah. We have a mover and a seconder for Jody's report. Brian and Ross. All in favour? Against? Carried. You want to, get, Adam to the kitty key and replace the meeting?
Una here, mā te ruru, taku nui. Te wātea, te mama, te nākau, te tinana, te inenaro. E te ara, takatu, ko rā, te roho, te whakarira, ake te ranga, te tēnā, tēnā, haumue, hui tai.
Thank you all. I'll close the meeting. Thanks very much. Lunch,